Session. It's 1:03 p.m. on Tuesday, May 1st, and we're in the City Center Conference Room. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that microphones can pick up side conversations, and we had an experience with that, just so you're aware. When we had our last break, there were several comments made to me about side conversations during our break. So just be aware. That's all we ask that you do.
Really good conversation.
They enjoyed them.
If I may, part of that last week was we had someone else doing the broadcast for us. And so before the meeting, they started filming before the meeting started. And during the break, they forgot to turn things off during the break. So we're getting those edited out, but it's always just a good reminder. And even during the meeting, that thing will pick up.
So just so you're aware, and I don't think the person, I had actually two people and they were just fine. Didn't have any concerns about things being discussed, but they did sit back and enjoy. They said, we sat back and enjoyed the conversation, right?
Yep.
And it was the newspaper, so be ready. You don't necessarily want that. So anyway, we will begin with the roll call. Cliff
Strachan.
Brian Jones.
George Stewart,
Dave Sewell. David Buren.
Elizabeth Anderson,
Gary Winterton,
David Harding.
Kelsey Zarbach,
Dave Knack. George Handley.
very good.
Referring back to that last line of comments, are you going to tip us off as to who might get quoted?
She just said she enjoyed it. So
She'll be calling you.
Can we see it before it gets
Cliff, before we have the opening prayer, we are going to spend the time to you for a minute.
Come on up. So council, as you know, we tend to have interns. These are 2 interns this summer. All the council members, just hold your hand up real quick. These are the 7 people that we serve. Okay, and in turn, we all serve the people of Provo. This is Abby Woodfield. She is a lifelong resident of Provo. Apparently she grew up in Wayne Parker's neighborhood in his ward. But she also is a BYU student, just finished first year of economics. This is Joe Hamlin. He hails from the Washington State, and he's finished a degree in political science, right?
Yes, sir.
At BYU, Idaho. And so he's in the process of applying to grad schools. They'll be here till August 30th and stop by and say hello, and they're happy to serve you.
Very good.
Any questions for them? Quizzes?
Abby's also a killer soccer player, in case anyone.
I heard that, yes.
And her father and I were in graduate school together. So.
And Abby has agreed to give us our opening prayer. Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for the opportunity to meet together and for the opportunity to have these jobs and to make decisions for the city. And please bless that those decisions can be wise decisions and that we can come together with peace. And please bless that we can all have a good evening and do what we need to do. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you. It's proposed that the following minutes be approved. The joint meeting of the Provo Municipal Council with the Landmarks Commission on March 27th, 2018, April 10th, 2018 work meeting, and April 17th, 2018 work meeting. Are there any changes, additions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll declare those minutes approved by unanimous consent. We will now turn the time over to, let's see, discussion. We will skip item number 1. There's been a couple of questions raised about that one. So we're going to hold off on that one. That will also be taken off of the council meeting tonight, just because of a couple of legal questions that we're getting away. We'll go to item number 2, a presentation from Mountainland Association of Governments on the third quarter funding in relation to airports and transportation taxes overall. So we're glad to have Andrew Jackson here with us from MAG. We'll turn the time over to him.
Do I need to stand in a certain place for the camera or anything? Or
Just
there it
the
is.
podium's
There?
back.
Okay, perfect. And, I have some extra copies. You probably have it, but just in case you want to write some notes or something on there as well, that'll be just fine. And as stated, I am Andrew Jackson. I am the Executive Director of Mountainland Association of Governments, and I'm going to go over the different transportation quarter-cent sales tax that are available in the state, which ones are enacted in Utah County. And also, I had read with interest a newspaper article about the airport expansion in Provo, and there is some opportunity for a possibility of some funding through the third quarter cent sales tax for some of that funding for your airports. It'd have to be competitively done, but we'll just talk about that a little bit as we get into here. If you have any questions, stop me and I'll answer them, and I also have some time at the end for questions as well. First off, there are 8 options to get to 4 quarters plus a 20th in state code. And the 3 on the left-hand side are bolded. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter on that left-hand side are bolded. Those are ones that are actually adopted within Utah County. And this comes out of Title 5912 of the state code. And then you'll see these 2213, 2215, 2216, 2214. Those are the subsections of that part of state code dealing with those quarters. So there are 4 quarters that you can enact, and there are 8 options to get to those 4 quarters. And then we just recently had this 5th 20th that actually is available starting next week in the state. So we have the first quarter, 2213 is a quarter cent, 100% of that goes to transit. The second quarter that we have, 2216, is not a quarter, but it's a 0.3, and I'll explain that in a minute. 87% of that goes to front runner, 5% is for BRT, and 8% for roads. The third quarter cent, 2218, also referred to as the Alexander quarter. If any of you know Jeff Alexander, that second quarter is Jeff Alexander's quarter. And then the third quarter is 2218, and it is a quarter cent for roads, transit, airport, trails, and the MPO recommends those projects to the county to be funded. The fourth quarter, also known as Prop 1, went to the voters a couple years ago. It failed at about 59%, 41 in favor, 59% opposed. Countywide referendum or opinion question is actually what it was. And it would have had 40% going to UTA, 40% going to cities, towns, and the county, and then 20% of that would go to the county solely. And then that was modified just this last legislative session to put some deadlines as to when it can and can't be adopted, and then also added in a fourth quarter cent, another option in that fourth quarter cent, which is that the cities have an option of putting it in where 50% goes to transit, 50% goes to cities and towns, and that's only if the county doesn't adopt it by a certain point in time. Then they also added in the option of a 5th 20th, so instead of a quarter, it's a 0.20. And this has 100% goes to transit. It has a deadline of when it can be in place. And then also, it can only put if the county has 4 quarters in place, and then the 5th 20th can be put into place. And this 5th 20th, although 100% of it goes to transit, it would go to the county, and they could competitively bid out 2 different transit providers for this service. Here is another way to look at the 3 quarters that we have in Utah County. This first quarter, transit, adopted between 1984 and 2011, voter approved, generates about 22 million annually. I think the county's thinking that it may, well, yeah, it's about 22 million.
100% of that goes straight to UTA, operates the bus systems that we have. We have 0.30 adopted in 2006. It was voter approved, 26 million because it's a slightly more than a quarter. 87% goes to Frontrunner, 5% for BRT or non-fixed guideway transit. 8% went to roads, built and operate rail, as well as multiple highways, so we had approved that. This third quarter, adopted in 2008, was no citizen vote. This was an action of the county commission, and I'll explain this a little bit more detail, but we had a commitment to put $65 million into the I-15 reconstruction in order to get the 1.725 billion from the state for that reconstruction of I-15, way back when we did the I-15 core project. And when this section of the code was adopted, we at MAG and some at Utah County, we were not aware that it didn't require a vote of the public. After it was approved and enrolled, we went through that 300-page document to determine what we had to do to go to a vote of the public, and it said that actually was just a legislative action by the county commission. 100% of that money goes through the NPO. It's actually in the county, but it gets approved through the NPO, the projects. It's done multiple highways, and it can go to airports. This is a history of the first quarter, the transit quarter. Provo Norm adopted that transit quarter in 1984. Prior to that, transit was funded through alcohol taxes. So a tax on alcoholic beverages funded first transit. And in 1984, there was a, Provo Norm had, I'm not sure it was Utah Valley Transit or what it was called at that time. I got it back to the office. But there's just a transit system between Provo and Norm. And then they decided to go into UTA. And unlike other communities and other counties that went in countywide in the vote, in Utah County came in city by city. So in 1989, America Fork, Lehigh, Linden, and Pleasant Grove enacted the tax, again, based off a vote of the public. And then Springville, and you can see other communities that came along up to 2010 when San Oakland came in. And then 2011, so this represents about 99% of the sales tax generation in the county, 98%. This represents about 2%. Now, most of the people in Elk Ridge, when they shop, they would shop in one of these communities that was within the UTA transit district. So they were paying the tax anyway. So in 2011, the legislature said, if you got the majority of your communities in a county are in the transit district, then you can enact this tax in those remaining communities. And so by commission action, Cedar Fort, Fairfield, Woodland Hills, Elk Ridge, Goshen, Genoa, and the unincorporated Utah County came into the transit district. The second quarter, county option sales tax for fixed guideway to fund a system for public transit and for highways. November 2006, opinion question passed 69% with the effective date of April 2007 because there had to be, once it was enacted in November, there had to be a little lag time for businesses to be able to change their computer system and cash registers, et cetera, to increase that sales tax. The opinion question, the state code allowed the opinion question for the vote to, when you went out, the county could choose what percentage these splits were. So in discussions at the NPO with the mayors, et cetera, we determined that 87% would be for commuter rail, 5% would be for non-fixed guideway, and the advertisements that went out to the public identified as a BRT of 5%, and then 8% went to some roads. After passing it, then the legislature in 2007 took the tax off of food. But they allowed then the county commission to increase that tax from 0.25 to 0.30 to make up that difference. And in actuality, it was about a $5 million drop because of that base of food was taken off. Even though the rate was increased, the base was substantially shrunk. And so we actually did see, even with that increase, a significant decline. That original 92% went directly to UTA. And then there's 8% that went to the roads. the county borrowed that 8% money from UTA over a series of years, what that would amount to, and was able to front load some of the roads instead of waiting for 30 years for 8% to gather up enough money. And then a couple of years later, the county actually went and bonded from a private company and paid UTA back that 8% with interest. Must have voter approval to change either the percents here, so you'd have to go back out to opinion question of the public to change those percents, or if it was to be repealed, it would have to go back to the vote of the public.
So regarding those percents, did 5% really go to VRT, or did they kind of use that as a method to finance some borrowing?
Great question. So we got a legal opinion on the 87.5 and 8% from the Attorney General's office that said that that didn't have to be yearly, but there had to be a plan in place over a given period of time, a reasonable period of time, that you would adjust for this. So in actuality, the first couple of years, 100% of it went to roads. And then, but over time, it would be adjusted back to where you would have this mix. Because of the decline in the revenue, UTA used both the 87% and 5% for the first several years after the road portion to go towards commuter rail. So when we went for the BRT and we said, we need this money for BRT, they said the money's not there. I said, well, it needs to be there because 5% has to go to non-fixed guideway transportation. And they said it will over time, but they don't have the money today because they were spending that money for operations and maintenance on commuter rail. And again, it was over a period of time, it wasn't a yearly basis. Because we had this decline when it was taken off of food, that reduced this 5% that was allocated for BRT. So then we have this instance where when UTA has bonds paid off on the first quarter and second quarter, or a portion of those bonds paid off, they will be able to pay back the third quarter that is borrowing money or loaning money from the third quarter to UTA for BRT, and then that loan will be paid off fully with first and second quarter funds. So in about 2028, there'll be about a 50 million repayment. And so everybody wants to be mayor or council member when we suddenly have $50 million to go towards road projects in 2028. Did that answer your question? Good enough? Okay. Third quarter Senate, 5912-2218. I like to say that I probably have read this section of code more than anybody else in the free world. I spent a lot of time in there with its original enactment and then the modification of what was called the silos. So this was originally available for to counties, cities, or towns, a local option sales tax for airports, highways, and systems of public transit. This was what the original title was back when it was originally enacted by the state legislature. However, again, we were required to put in 65 million of local county sales tax dollars into the I-15 reconstruction. How many other counties have been required outside of Utah County to put money into their I-15 reconstruction? Okay, so by the legislature, they said that of this county option sales tax, 40% would have to go towards state roads. 40% could go towards regional roads, and 20% for corridor preservation.
Can you help me understand why nobody else will do it and Utah County was required to? What's it, why?
Let's just say hypothetically that there could have been a Speaker of the House who was from Southern Utah. There could have been other influential legislators from other parts of the state who felt like Utah County legislators were voting against these sales tax increases, but wanted to have I-15 reconstructed, but they weren't approving, Utah County legislators at that time weren't approving increases in the sales tax to fund those transportation projects that the county wanted to have. And so they felt that Utah County had to come up with its quote unquote fair share or skin in the game to get the I-15 reconstruction, because in the past, there had been a history of legislators in Utah County voting against transportation increases in funding, but they wanted projects. Does that make sense?
No, but I can live with
Okay.
that for right now.
So, legislators outside of Utah County were upset with legislators inside of Utah County because of legislators inside of Utah County were not voting for, in fact, they were voting opposed to increases in the second quarter cent and allowing a third quarter cent. So this legislation was voted against by several members of Utah County legislators.
Okay.
But Utah County was majorly benefiting from the bond based off of increased transportation revenues. And so there was a thing saying, wait, you're voting against the increases in the funding. However, your project is the major project that we're doing, but you're voting against the funding for that. So we're going to make you pay for this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how it originally went. After the first 5 years, it was to be enacted by the county commission without a vote of the public. The county commissioners went to the mayor's group as the MPO. The mayors unanimously supported the county commission in enacting that. The county commission then enacted the tax. And in 2008, it was only a county-wide option. It was not a city-town option. And then October 7th of 2008, the county approved the $65 million bond or $65 million to go I-15. And then in May of 2009, approved the list of the projects that would be bonded. So in addition to the I-15 project, there were other things like Geneva Road, the West Side Connector going out to the airport, that was funded through third quarter cent funding. Then in 2014, SB 188 was approved, and that took away these silos. So UDOT kind of felt weird about using county money for state roads. They didn't feel good about it. They felt it was county money. The locals should be able to decide where that goes. So we got those silos removed, the 40, 40, and 20. And then also, this must have a voter approval to repeal it. And if you wanted to enact this quarter, you would have had to have gone to a vote for that, except that they changed it in state law this last legislative session. And if a county wants to put in the third quarter or fourth quarter or fifth quarter, you do not have to go to a vote of the public. It does neither prohibits nor requires a vote of the public in order to enact the third, fourth, or the fifth. The third quarter cent further on airports, as which is probably more important to you right now in this discussion. It lists the different things that the tax can be used for, and one of those, 4D, is expended for a project or service relating to an airport facility for the portion of the project or service that is performed within a county, city, or town within which the sales and use tax is imposed. So a airport that is in Utah County, because this third quarter cent is enacted in Utah County, and Provo Airport is within the boundaries of Utah County. For a county legislative body that imposes sales and use tax, if that airport facility is part of the regional transportation plan of the area's metropolitan planning organization, if a metropolitan planning organization exists. So if you had San Pete County enacted the third quarter cent, and there's an airport at Manti, San Pete County is not in an MPO, so they wouldn't have to have it in the plan, but because you're in Utah County, it's part of the MPO, then it has to be in the MPO's plan. Now, the good thing is, MAG is currently in the third year of the 4-year process to update the regional transportation plan. We've got a lot of the information's all put in, we're agreeing on numbers, et cetera, and we're writing that plan. So what we would ask is that Provo City provide a description of the improvements that you're going to do to the airport, the regional significance of that, et cetera. And then we will just basically copy and paste that into our document for our long-range plan. So we have a section for railroads, we have a section for freight. However, we haven't had much to do with airports But it is something that is covered in the regional transportation plan, so we just ask that Provo prepare something associated with that we can put into that regional transportation plan. And then, once it's in the plan, then just like road plans, just like Dave and Dave are familiar with applying for third quarter sales tax funding for road projects, it's the same thing. We have a road and transit projects. This would just have an airport project. Airport project associated with that would be competitively done against other projects. We're just finishing up this cycle. It's a 2-year cycle. So once it's in the plan, then you can apply for funding in the 2020 priority list. That's like a 2022 funding list. However, there's opportunities because some projects are ready, some projects aren't, that there could be some funding available for that. It's probably not gonna, I don't know what projects you have at the airport or the costs associated with it. I just read the newspaper article. So this could be a funding source. My guess is, depending upon the scope of the project, you probably will need several pieces put together, and this could be a portion of that that's available, and just have to work out that timing of its availability.
And can I ask a question?
Yep.
When's the due date on the concept reports? And then also, are there limitations on what those funds can be used for? Does that include the terminal building?
Yeah, it just says airport. So if it's identified in the blurb in the regional transportation plan, as long as it's identified in the regional transportation plan, and then this funding goes towards that project. So it would also probably help you with any federal FAA funding, because it would be included in the regional transportation plan identified in there. So anything you have in there, you want to put that in the regional transportation plan, and then those projects are then available for that. So it probably wouldn't go to operations and maintenance, but any new facilities or expansion. And in fact, when we first did the original 59-12-22-16, the Alexander second quarter, Mayor Billings had identified a project, I think it was something to do with maybe like the airport apron or something associated with that, but then decided that wasn't something that you wanted to pursue, but it was actually one that was identified way back when, before they enacted the tax. I think it was actually the third quarter before they enacted it. It was one of the projects that was identified, but didn't get through anything. And so it's just that same process that you went through with the road projects. So it'll be like 2019 that you do this identifying. You use concept reports and go through the expanded report system. You'll do the tour, et cetera. And I think you want to identify just, there's going to be some, as you expand that, and there's going to be more flights out of Provo, that's going to reduce congestion on I-15 of people going up to the airport in Salt Lake. So then this quarter-cent sales tax, each of the quarter cents generates about $22 million. And this shows the breakup by community where that funding is generated.
$22 million over what period of time?
1 year. So you see, Provo generates, and this is based off of last year's sales tax, and of course, sales tax is delayed about 4 months. But Provo generates about 18.25% of all sales taxes generated in Utah County is generated in Provo, which comes to some about $4 million a year. And you can see where the other communities lie along this. Now, when we fund projects through the third quarter cent funding or second quarter cent funding, we don't say, oh, we're going to split this up and each community gets it directly based off of that, because it's needs based. So it's kind of like spraying for mosquitoes. Some people would say with mosquito abatement, you should spray the county completely based off of population density of humans in each city. So even cities that don't have a mosquito problem, you should still spray for mosquitoes. Others would say, no, it's best to spray for mosquitoes where the mosquitoes are. And so need-based. So those areas that have a high concentration of mosquitoes, we spray where the high concentration of mosquitoes are. We don't base it on a per capita ounce spray, right? So we don't do that with transportation as well. We look at those needs countywide. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So
Can we get a copy of this? Kelsey, or
It's,
It's in.
yeah, it's got it over.
In our-
Mhm, yep. But just so you understand where the money comes from. So if you look at Provo, Orem, and Lehigh, you're pushing over 50% of sales tax generation in the county. Fourth quarter cent. I said there's two options. There's the original option, which is the Prop 1 option, which was defeated at referendum a couple of years ago. There's couple little tweaks to this that they put in with this last legislative session. One is that it's available to be put in May 8th of this year, so next week, the county could enact that. They don't have to go to a vote of the public, they can just do it as a legislative action of the county commissioners. If they do that, all money that's generated from the date that they enacted, clear until June of 2019, the county gets 100% of those revenues. So if the county put it in, gathered it up for a year, they could get 22 million that first year.
That'd be their last legislative act.
I don't know. So that's, that's a question that they have to decide if they want to do that and whether they've got support or not. Essentially, this is the same tax breakdown that Prop 1 was that failed. So they would get 22 million the first year, and then after that, it's broken up into this split, plus they double dip. They get part of the city's portion, then they also get the county portion. So they generate about 4.5 million a year.
Andrew, so if the county enacted that, do they have say where that goes? They can determine where that goes. Anywhere in the city, or does it have?
So this first 22 million, that first full year goes directly to the county. They have say, except that it can only be used for a transportation or transit project or debt payments on a transportation or transit project. So they could take the 22 million and pay down third quarter cent debt if they wanted to. Or they could spend it on some other transportation project at the sole discretion of the county commissioners that first year. Then after that first year, they get about 4.5 million out of the 22 million. And this amount goes to the cities. It doesn't go through MAG, doesn't go through any approval process. It's this dollar amount goes directly to the cities into your transport, has to be used for transportation or transit. And UTA gets this 8.8 million for transit. It goes directly to UTA. The other fourth quarter option, so the county has 2 years to enact this. If they don't enact it by June of 2020, so if they don't enact it by June of 2020, the cities have a first right of refusal. So this can only be done countywide. After 2 years, you have a city by city option. So the city could enact this. 50% goes to the cities and towns, 50% goes to UTA. It's reduced a little bit because an unincorporated Utah County doesn't get any funding, so it's $300,000 difference there. But you take Provo, for instance, the total sales tax would generate about 4 million. 2 million of that you would get directly, and then another 2 million would go to UTA. If you so chose to do this, you would want to get with UTA before you did it and say, we want to have an agreement of where this 2.2 million that goes to UTA is spent within our city. Additionally, you could get with Orem or Springville, or a group of communities could get together and do a transit project out of this money that goes to UTA within those communities. So you can get together and pool your funds together and do a major transit project.
the other 3/4 doesn't come directly to the city, so this is the first time it comes directly to the city
Yes.
proportionally,
Mhm.
what they put in.
Yep. It goes directly to the cities. So MAG really doesn't have a dog in this fight at all because none of the money comes to us. It goes directly to the counties and the cities. That's correct. It's the only quarter that goes as a direct allocation to those communities. So this is only available after July 1st of 2020. And these options go away after starting on July 1st of 2022. By code right now, state code right now, you only have until July of 2022 or June 30th of 2022 to enact this. And then it goes away from state code.
Can I just clarify, so under either option, if it's adopted by the county, it still comes to the city?
Yes, and that's one of the concerns that the county has. If you look at this, the county would take 100% responsibility for enacting the tax, and they get 22% of that tax.
That's fair.
So 78% of the tax goes directly to somebody else that they have no, I mean, it's a direct from the state tax commission, boom, right into your fund, and it would have to be designated for transportation
The
purposes.
legislature did that because they thought we could city support.
Right. Yeah. Well, that, and then, you're talking about $22 million the first year directly to the county that they can retire debt. In Salt Lake County, they're talking like $50 million. So Salt Lake County has a thing where they stated that they will enact that tax as soon as they get something like cities representing 80% of the population in Salt Lake County pass a resolution supporting them, then they will enact it. And it's highly likely they will. Now remember that Salt Lake County, it was a 51-49% vote. So it was only 1% off of passing in Salt Lake County 2 years ago. It was a 20% difference in Utah County. So this is the same thing the Prop 1 was. This is a different animal altogether, and it's a city by city option. One other thing, and I know I'm going a little long here, but there is also, you probably heard about the Our Schools Now initiative, where they want to go on the ballot and increase income tax by 7/8%. They had an agreement with the legislature that they worked out where they will put an opinion question on the ballot in November, a non-binding opinion question to increase the gasoline tax by 10 cents per gallon. As you are aware, the gasoline tax goes to A, state road funds, B, county road funds, and C, city road funds. So you hear about B and C road funds, B is county, C is city, A is state. 70% of the gasoline tax goes to A road funds at the state, and then 30% is divided up between B and C road funds and there's even D road funds for dirt roads in rural counties. This is your estimated B road fund allocation for this last year. What they're going to do is have a non-binding vote to increase the gasoline tax by 10 cents per gallon. That generates a certain amount of money. 70% of that increase will go to the state, to UDOT. UDOT then transfers out an equal dollar for dollar amount out of their general fund, out of UDOT into the general fund to fund education. Now the benefit is that there's still 30% there that goes to cities and towns. So you will see a 34%, if that passes and it gets enacted and there's a 10 cent per gallon gas increase, you will see about a 34% increase in your B and C road funds, again, directly to your community. So they're hoping that the cities will support the Our School Now initiative to increase that gas tax, and the gas tax is more of a user fee because those who buy gas pay for the roads, et cetera, and so there'll be a switch there. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. So that's something you're going to need to decide. You're going to need to decide on the third quarter and the airports, how you want to do that. The fourth quarter, if you want to have the county support the cities going for it, or if you want to support the county, and then this. Go ahead.
I had heard from this, if it's true, the reason that 70% goes to the A roads, the reason that they can kind of justify that it goes to education is because that the gas tax is not covering all of the state highways and roads, and so money is being taken out of the general fund to do highways now. So the idea is if we increase this, then less money has to come out of the general fund for the state roads, and so that money can then go to education instead.
Yes. So
None of the gas tax is going to schools.
correct. Mm-hmm.
Those are two separate issues.
Right, yeah. So what the state constitution says that auto-related sales will go towards transportation. That was never actually done. And then when Becky Lockhart got put in as Speaker of the House, she moved that. So about 18% of the sales that's generated in the state is auto-related. Buying a car, buying air fresheners, buying windshield wipers. About 18% of the general fund revenues are auto-related. So that should have always gone to transportation. And so she got half of that in. And then when we did, oh gosh, it was maybe 2010, 2011, we passed legislation that then moved that up to over time to where we got 18% of the general fund went towards transportation because that equal to the amount of sales taxes generated from transportation purposes, buying cars. So we held harmless, so the schools and everybody else got the same amount of money, but as the economy turned from the down bottom of the depression up, we got a disproportionate amount. So then we got more of it until we got to the 18%. However, no other users of the general fund got less than what they had gotten before. So they all saw some increase, we saw more. But that didn't set well with the education folks. So you have income tax that goes straight to education, you got general fund, a portion of that goes to it. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, we realize that auto-related sales tax goes to roads, but we want it to be more of a user fee and be more gas tax related. So they'll increase the gas tax, take that portion of that 18% of the general fund, that's a dollar for dollar change, and move that over. So we'll probably be back down around maybe a 10% hit out of the general fund, and the other will be made up dollar for dollar. So there'll be a hold harmless. It won't be less than, it'll just be that dollar for dollar. Does that make sense? Thank you. And then just if you had any questions on that, and there's some of those things that, oh, and I got my personal email there. You can email me my personal email, or you can do ajax@mountainland.org. It's like that guy on TV that was being interviewed and he gave out his home phone number instead of the city phone number. Anyway, feel free to email me any way you want, and I'm happy to answer those. And some of it, it's going to be that thing like at 2 in the morning in a couple of days, you're going to wake up and be like, oh, wait, what was this? Just send me an email and I'll respond to it. And maybe at 2 in the morning. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dave, do you have any comments or anything? This is looking for funding for several roads and for turbulence.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it. Thank you.
We need to move on quickly. There's an application process that Dave's very familiar with with other MAG projects, road projects, and we need to get on the docket on it as part of the airport and other projects. But I will say MAG has been very supportive of a number of our projects, Lakeview Parkway, the West Side Connector, several trails. We're working right now with MAG on a pedestrian overpass. There's a number of things that are going on. They've been very supportive.
I think key is going to be, as soon as you can, get us the information on the airport so we can stick that into our regional plan, because we're right in the process of doing that right in the plan.
So you can coordinate that with Steve, with whoever.
I've got it down from our staff meeting.
Thank you.
Be done.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you very
Let me know
much.
if you have any questions.
Thank you. We will now move to item number 3, a discussion on options for funding on Miss Provo and the parade float. And we've asked, is it Kelsey's going to take over here and give us a little bit of history, and then we need to have a discussion with the council on some of the things that we have a few changes, and if Kelsey doesn't tell you what some of those things need to be taken care of, I'll present it and we'll talk about that. So, Kelsey.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just going to show you some of the data that we've.
Before you do, Kelsey, I want to introduce Robin. Do you want to introduce anybody and just take a minute here? We'll just let you know what you do and what we're doing here. So I want you to be involved in this too.
Okay, thank you. I'm Robin Pullum. I'm the director of Miss Provo. Cynthia Gaffane is here with me. She has been on our committee before and had a daughter who was Miss Provo, so I thought she would be.
And one that was first runner-up before you wrote.
That's right. So she has a lot of information. I thought she might be a good resource also.
Okay.
Questions.
Just wanted to introduce you here for our
Thanks so much.
discussion. Thank you, Kelsey. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so I can just show you, there's a memo that we sent out that hopefully was informative to you.
in the SIRE material, but basically Gary Winterton had kind of always come back to three different points when it came to Miss Provo and the float. It was just basically separating out float costs from Miss Provo costs, and then kind of what the relationship between the Miss Provo organization and the float are. And so hopefully this data kind of shows that information. This right here is information that came from invoices to Provo City, either from the Miss Provo organization or from the float refurbishment company since 2011 up to 2018. And the blue here is what we had as float refurbishment costs. So most often, I think up until about 2016 or 2017, Provo City paid the float refurbishment company directly.
Which is Modern Display. And Bobby, could I ask you a question on that? Do you have a contract with them, or is it an annual contract?
It's an annual contract, and we had done, before we would get 3 different companies to send in bids, but Modern Display usually came up with the best thing, and then we did have problems when we went with other companies. So we've stuck with them for the last little
Our
while.
float that year was almost not in our parade, which is July 4th.
Okay.
It was almost, they didn't have it finished. It was terrible.
I think it was 2012 that we went with a different company. That's at least what the invoices showed, and it looks like the amount that went toward the float was less relatively. One thing that Tracy Orm in the mayor's office explained to me was that at least as she was helping with the float invoices, she noticed that one year Modern Display was provide an invoice for about $5,000, and then the next year it would be about $10,000, so it would alternate.
And the reason for that is that to save costs, we would just have them revamp it a little bit. So really, we only had a totally different float every other year, and then they just cleaned it up the in-between year. So that did save us some costs.
Yeah, and I think Draper City does something similar. They spend about $14,000 every 2 years on a float, and they just keep the same float or something. It's along the same lines. So things like that happen. Anyway, so it was about, I think, $11,000 is kind of a standard amount that the city was paying. And if I understood correctly, for the most part, it just covered the float refurbishment. Not a lot of money went towards scholarships or photos or anything like that. In about 2017, the council allocated more money toward Miss Provo. And so that's why you see a jump here in Miss Provo expenses. And so.
And the reason the council did that was because the mayor's office no longer did that. So they gave us the budget to put it in the council office.
The Miss Provo organization wanted less responsibility for fundraising because they had been doing most of the fundraising, which I think resonated with many.
Okay.
And that's probably why, like.
Sorry, can I get that again? So what was the difference within having it in the mayor's office?
They basically were done with it.
Just different budgets. Their budget, our
And
budget.
they didn't, and they felt that they really weren't, I'm gonna be blunt here, is that they didn't particularly think that was in their vision. And so they said if you wanna do it, the council will have to do it. And we took a vote in 2017 and the council decided that they would do that. They were willing to do that. And so.
It was all right. I think Mr. Henry's the only one that's not part of that. The way that I would describe that is that Miss Provo was seeking to do less of their own fundraising and wanted the city to put in more money. The mayor said he wasn't willing to do that. But he said, you can always go to the council if you'd like. So Miss Provo approached the council and said, we'd like you to fund the Miss Provo, help cover the Miss Provo expenses, which the council was leaning towards doing. And the mayor said, look, if you want to take this over, I've been doing it the way I want, I thought it should be done. If you want to make changes, that's fine, but you take it over. And the council said, okay. And so not only were we putting more money in than we had before, but putting more city money in than we had before, but since then it's been coordinated through the council office.
No,
and not out of the mayor's office.
Question, I don't know that the city was actually putting more money in. I don't think the city was putting more money in because all they did was transfer from the mayor's office to
The council actually voted to put more money in beginning
At
of
that time?
2017.
Okay, thank you.
Which we're very grateful for, because I just want you to know that every other, even tiny towns in this county, we are the biggest city in this
I'm
county.
gonna have to stop you.
Okay,
I'm sorry. We're gonna have to, I can't just have,
okay, sorry.
especially, this is a council discussion, so we will have to go with that, and then we'll give you a chance here. That's why I wanted to make sure you're here. So, that it's important, please ask. And we're gonna talk about today.
Just a clarifying question, as I recall, the difference in funding was around 5,000?
Well, it looks like you can see what it is.
10,000.
In
And that was-
2016, the invoices, we weren't sure if they were incomplete. That is the year that we feel like there might have been a few missing points, or maybe it was fine, but it just didn't look the same as the other years in terms of what we were getting
You
back,
must
so.
have voted 21, so.
Around about 10,000.
So it was more money, that was something that I did not understand myself, but okay.
So this is just comparing Provo's spending on the float and then Miss Provo for those years. We did reach out to other cities that have pageant royalty that compete in the Miss Utah organization pageant. I can show you the information from that if you'd like to see it. I can find it. Yeah. But anyway, we reached out to 18 cities, and thank you to our intern Joseph for putting this part together for us. But we reached out to 18 cities and 12 responded, and out of the 12, 9 of the cities had their own parade float, and so these are the 9 cities you see listed here. There were 3 cities that didn't have a parade float, but they still had pageant royalty, and Roy is the city that specifically mentioned that their pageant royalty rides a convertible in their parade. So that was just something that I thought you'd want to know that's not included here. But once again, we have our cost divided by float cost and pageant cost. And this is Provo here at the end and also highlighted down here in blue. And this is for the most recent cost that we have. So this is looking at 2018. So we're about $21,000, and that's about what most cities are spending. And we have these other smaller cities down here that are spending less. Draper and Lehigh are kind of our outliers. And again, this is looking at Draper spending $14,000 on their float, but they also spend about $7,000, like for $14,000 for 2 years is what they spend. And so that might explain why they have a higher number. Yeah.
So to also as a percentage of our total budget,
We didn't look
would
at,
be way less.
yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. We didn't look into the total budget costs in that comparison. Some people have been curious about float storage. Where is the float stored and who drives the float? And looks like Provo, for the most part, was the only city that didn't actually have a city employee driving the float. Most cities store the floats on city property. And so that's basically the information that we got back from that survey.
So you specifically said these are cities that also participate in the Miss Utah. Are there cities that don't participate?
I didn't look into all of that.
If you'd like me
Yeah,
to,
please.
can I answer that?
Yeah.
Goshen,
And
That's in the- in the
Nephi, there's
county.
like some tiny.
tiny little
cities that
municipalities
don't.
do not participate,
And
and
outside
they
of
don't
Utah
have a
County?
float. Pardon me?
Outside of Utah County?
Yeah, I
No,
don't
everybody,
think there's
every
any
single
here.
city in this county participates.
So I'm at, so do you know outside of, say, Salt Lake County, are there cities in Salt Lake County? Do they all participate as well, or? are there-
We have over 50 contestants every year at the Miss Utah pageant, and they come from across the state, from St. George up to Logan. So all the, even some smaller towns. But there's, I think Goshen and Tooele,
I was the other.
Tooele and Nephi, but I think now Tooele is doing it, but I think Nephi doesn't. But they're very small places.
Chelsea?
Just one comment on that. I didn't look at every city, but I do know that some of the 50 contestants are like county contestants, or it's not always like a specific city, 50 cities sending representatives. So anyway, I guess the last thing I would say is that after talking to Tracy Orr and just a few other people in the city, one thing that might be helpful, depending on what the council and Miss Provo organization decide to do in the future, is have some kind of contract that just kind of specifies expectations or terms, because it sounds like in the past there have been some things that are consistently up in the air, like who's driving the float, or Provo City apparently in the past hasn't been aware of how many parades Miss Provo participates in, and Miss Provo has that information, but it seems like some of the communication has been off, and so Provo has certain expectations that Miss Provo participate in certain things, then it might be good to identify what those expectations are and then talk and coordinate accordingly.
It's my understanding too that the Miss Provo, there's about 15 parades that they would normally consider to participate in. They get to about 10 to 12 a year.
We did all the parades that Mayor Curtis asked us to do, and then a couple extra.
The other thing is that the float for the city is stored at the airport. And because it is, an access getting in is a challenge, because you have to get cleared by security there to get into the airport to go pick it up and things like that. But that's one of the complications we have with it being where it is.
And you say these other places are city stored, what does that mean? We don't know where they are.
They didn't really specify necessarily in their comments. Some people store them in parks and rec locations, like big sheds, things like that, but I don't know exactly what everyone does. But they do say that their cities have helped store the floats in the past and currently.
Okay. Any questions here before?
I kind of wanted to explore the first question of why would we do a float?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Could we roll up that?
Yeah.
So just real quick, there's just been some talk about, all of this stuff, and is it, do we want to have a float? What about the liability, and what's the point, kind of thing. So we could just look at some pros and cons, or costs and benefits. I think it would be helpful just to kind of step aside, and focus solely on this question. Separate it from Miss Provo, separate it from other things. What's the point of Provo having a float? Is there any point? Why would we consider doing this?
Go ahead.
And I was on the committee when Mayor Curtis tried to do away with the float. And I'll tell you what happened. The float is a media advertising for Provo. Every town has a day, Fiesta days, Strawberry days, Steel days, whatever, and they all have a parade. That year, in 2011, he tried to hold the float and not participate. And he got calls from all the mayors of all these little towns and said, fine, then we will withdraw from your Freedom Days parade. So we would have had absolutely no floats except for a few that are done commercially for, like KSL or whatever. And so then he backpedaled and said, okay, fix the float. And so that's one reason. It's actually an advertisement for Provo. It has really not a whole lot to do with Miss Provo. She just adds the eye candy to it. It's a publicity point and you are supporting all of those other little towns and their parades. And people love a parade, still do, which is amazing to me when we've got all this other media around that you can do. People still go and support. I mean, I don't know about if you go to the, Freedom Day parade, but I still go to the Freedom Day parade and I have to get up dang early to get the good seat and all of that. But it is super crowded. People come in from out of town. They love our parade and they love seeing the floats and they love seeing, all of it, the motorcycle policemen, everything, the little kids. And our parade, especially, and many of the other ones, do not allow any car traffic for pageant royalty. Like we mentioned, Roy, You could not ride a car in, I don't think, any of the parades in Utah County. They have a rule against that. That's only reserved for the mayor, city council, dignitaries from whoever they want to choose, to be the parade marshal, that kind of thing. They do not allow that. You have to be on a float to have your royalty on a float. And if, also that year, the mayor decided that we would not support Days of 47 because Spanish Fork decided to start doing their parade on the 24th of July weekend. So we started going to Spanish Fork to support them because they were in our county and they were part of the whatever county mayor association. Yeah, South County Mayor Association. So that's why they did that.
Thank you. George?
What is the percentage of what we're spending on public relations, which is public relations?
Yes.
It's a small percentage compared to what the mayor's budget, public relations.
Advertising / public relations. And the amount you talked about, we're looking at, we'll call it 11,000 between float maintenance and the cost to the logistical cost. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's basically included the driver that they have to pay for.
Right. Any other pros? Thank you for articulating that. So it's kind of public relations for just the broader public, but there's also some camaraderie with the other cities in the county. We've seen some friction with the county, and that the county does do. We were talking about this in leadership. The county does do things like was it the buffaloes last year, and it's the pig this year, and I don't think we participated in that last year. And sometimes those feelings, those goodwill feelings, can kind of grease some of the conflicts. And when we don't have those good feelings, sometimes it ends up being very costly. And so perhaps by having these relationships, supporting our fellow cities and receiving their reciprocal support, them being in our parade, I imagine they actually like to be in the great big parade. I mean, we're the county seat, and I think we kind of have the county parade. It's our city parade. It's not even our city parade, but it's in our city. It's kind of in our county.
We've got 9 minutes, David, so we need to have a discussion as a council here.
Okay. Any other costs?
I think the storage, maintenance, driving,
Storage.
those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there has been a real discussion this year of, should we save this money? Do we not want to deal with the headache, liability, the storage, logistics? Why do we even do that? I do think it's good to keep this in mind, and maybe we'll look at this and we say, the cons outweigh the pros, and maybe it makes sense, or maybe it doesn't make sense for us to sponsor a float. But I did want to make sure that we had a clear discussion, and so we can think about that and weigh out, regardless of Miss Provo, because there's additional things going on there. But with or without, does it make sense for Provo to have a float?
Hey, tell us when you need a motion.
Okay, what we need to do is, I'd still like to have a little bit of discussion about this. Right now, the city attorney, Brian, do you want to have any discussion with, I know that Robert has weighed in on some things. Have you talked with him about our liabilities with regards to floats? I know that we had an experience. We didn't have the experience, thank heavens, but Nephi had an experience with their city float last year, which was sad. Have you talked with
I haven't talked with Robert, actually. I think he's talked with the mayor and Wayne and given them some advice. I mean, I think the issue itself is fairly obvious, which is that if we own it, if we're driving it, if we're providing the employee and something happens, then it's going to be the city's responsibility. And we're a self-insured entity with excess liability coverage. And so if the float falls apart between the airport and the parade and causes an accident, or the driver doesn't look while he's backing up, but we face those same liabilities with the driving of all city vehicles.
Okay, there you go.
But so it's not different, but you need to recognize that this essentially is another city vehicle
Right.
that
But it's not
incurs all of those
licensed,
same
that's one of the
liabilities.
problems. It's not a license.
I don't know about that. Registered, you mean?
Well, it's, I don't, yeah, I'm not even
It's
sure.
not street
about that.
legal.
It's not, yeah, it's not street legal.
A lot of cities get around that simply by having a towing attachment on a different vehicle and towing the vehicle one way or the other.
And that's great. Miss Provo came to us and said, we don't want to do it anymore. We don't want to hire the driver. We don't want to take on that liability. At this point, they've been doing it, and I don't think it's fair to them to have to do it. I think if it's going to be a city float, I think we need to bring it back to the city. And they've been hiring somebody to do it. They've hired somebody for this year to do it. But I promised them that we would make a decision this year, and we, as a council, we need to talk about that and decide the direction that we want to take with the float. And in the past, the float has kind of gone hand in hand with Miss Provo. They've basically done it. The mayor turned it over, he said, you got it, and even before that, they did it. And so we need to make a decision, Dave.
Could we just clarify the request? So if I'm understanding it right, that you'd still like to have a float, but you'd like to have a city employee drive it? Is that?
And from the request, from what I understand, is they want to ride the float. You take the float. Correct?
I'm happy to help you get it decorated. We'll contact Modern, we'll do that stuff. We just don't want to deal with the driver. And we're even negotiable on registering for the parades. If that's something we need to do, we can do that for you.
Okay.
Have any of you ever driven a float? I did. Our driver backed out one day and I had to drive the float. It is hard. It is really hard because you have to drive 20 miles per hour and people are honking at you and everything, but it's very difficult because you are so worried about everything around you and you never can back up a float. At least I never could.
And that's what our city attorney is concerned about.
Wait, I think Cliff's answer would sell that if you had it towed.
I just think if it's a city float, the city should have the liability. We do anyway, and so I think for them to hire the driver and us have the liability, I'd rather have either no or yes. If we're gonna have a city float, it should be the city float, not the Provo.
And I agree with you. I struggle with having somebody else because the city would be sued anyway.
Well, let me just interject. I mean, the city will be named in the suit no matter what. I'm sure of that because of the fact that we're involved in some way. I don't think that necessarily means that the city loses no matter what. I mean, again, the policy question is for you to decide what you want to do. But my recommendation would be if the city doesn't want that liability and doesn't want to be the owner of the float, then they enter into a services agreement with the Miss Provo pageant that results in them taking on the responsibility.
They're saying they're not gonna do that.
Right, well, and that's where push comes to shove, that's where the policy decision comes back, right? You're just, if you're deciding to do that, then that might be doing away with it. But you do have that option.
And they I think that they would be fine. They told me that you'd be fine riding in the back of a convertible without a float. And so
You will get more backlash than we will, that's.
Yeah,
we
we
will
will get
more
all the
backlash.
backlash.
So apparently this came up before, in 2011, was it? And I don't know if it's worth broaching it with the other cities to see if they're still the same opinion, if they're still the same rules, if they would have the same reaction.
And I have talked with several mayors, and they're concerned if Provo does not have a float, they're not sure that they want to come to Provo's parade.
Exactly.
And so I understand that those are some concerns, and those cities do not like floats. Several cities do not like floats. You heard the mayor during our discussion.
They want us to have one, they don't like it.
What's that?
They don't like floats, but they want us to have one?
They don't like their own floats,
Oh.
is what I'm gonna tell you. I mean, floats are hard. And I don't know if any of you have been involved in making floats. I have. And we did it, and there was a time that that's why the LDS Church gave up. It was too hard. Those are hard to do. The LDS Church each stake used to be in charge of a float, and They dropped it. They said it's just,
That's why we contract with Modern Display.
and that's why we contract, because the city, we don't want to do it either. And that's one of the challenges that we face. And so this is why we wanted to bring this to the council, because there are pros and there are cons around this. Okay,
You have a parade without a float.
Not in,
and that's, yes, you can. You
How
can,
is the food festival? Have they weighed in on that?
yes, and I've talked
What's
with,
their feeling?
they really encourage Provo City to have a float. They say, how would the residents feel if you don't have a parade in your own float?
We're in your own parade.
float in your own parade, yeah.
In your own, yeah, in your own parade, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we allocate $11,000 in next year's budget for a float. And that we contract it out for design and maintenance, but we drive it.
Now, that's, and, okay, I'll let, you have a motion on the table, have a second, I've got some discussion around that still. Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Now, we're gonna open that back for discussion. One of the challenges, we, as a council, would have to go to the administration on that. Because we don't, as a council, I'm not willing to say we will drive it, because that is, I'm not gonna drive it as a council. So that needs to be, and I've asked the
With the
administration,
caveat that the administration approve a driver for the float.
and I appreciate that, because I think they're the ones that would have to do it.
The only way it wouldn't happen is that they will furnish a driver. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I was hoping to hear from Mayor Confuci about this, because it would be nice if the mayor's office oversaw this instead of the council, because we're sort of in a little bit of an administrative role here. I mean, I fully support it. I think it's great. I really appreciate everything that you folks have done over the years with Miss Provo, with the floats and everything. So I would like to be as supportive as we can be, but it does.
The administration has weighed in on this,
Okay.
and I have received, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to say, I would like them to weigh in personally at some point. And so I don't want to give you a secondhand information on that. And so I think that if you, I wish they were here. I don't know where they, yeah, and I appreciate that. What we're gonna have to do, we're gonna have to bring this back to council again. We are set for this year. You know, this year is no problem, but we do need to deal with it in a budget issue. It's not $21,000 when we deal with Miss Provo, and we need to have the discussion around Miss Provo, because those two have been so linked together. And are we as a council still willing to support those two, both of those things? I felt at one time we had the parade, we had the float issue, we had the combination of the float and Miss Provo separately.
So, just for argument's sake, if we didn't have Miss Provo, what would our parade, float look like? What would it be about? I mean,
Dave has some ideas and there are other things, but go ahead, if you want to take that for a second.
Yeah, just to answer, I believe there are some cities that have parades without royalty on them, or without anyone on them. You know, they're float. Another option, we really look at it as a public relations advertising team. We call ourselves startup. Call ourselves
Entrepreneurial.
home of the startup.
Yeah, they're entrepreneurial.
I've already forgotten it, but kind of the startup capital or whatever. So, you know, we could highlight a different startup at each parade. So it could be Provo, and then they could have a small of their own banner up there that's whatever, you know, startup elite would be highlighted. And I mean, the first time you do a parade, I mean, that's pretty exciting. The 11th of the season of the summer, now it becomes quite a chore. So if we had our own driver, but we rotated who was on it, that would be, I think, a great way to kind of push the Provo image.
George?
Well, I don't know if you're suggesting we just have a conversation about this later, but there's several questions here that, as a new city council member, I'd hear answers to about, you know, whether or not the float aligns with the city's goals, whether or not Miss Provo's organization aligns with city goals. You know, what happens, kind of what Dave's starting to talk about, what happens if we didn't have a float, either to the city of Provo or to Miss Provo. I mean, those are just questions I want answers to before I feel like I know what I'm
voting on, but so I don't know if there's time to have that more at length now, or we're proposing to
I'd like to continue my motion till the next meeting so we can have the administration say will they furnish a driver and take over the administration of the float. And then can we then discuss this program package itself? Okay.
And I appreciate that. Is that an amended motion?
I just withdraw my motion.
Okay. So if it's all right, we will bring this back. And I feel we owe this to Miss Provo. I think that they have been really good, and they want some legitimate answers. They want some answers.
It gives us 2 weeks to get some feedback also.
I appreciate that.
Can I say one comment, how they do their driver in Spanish Fork, in Pleasant Grove, in American Fork? Because when I was on the committee, and I had to drive it that one time, I was freaking out, and I asked these people, how do you do this? We are city employees. We take off Thursday during float season, and we drive our regular, we don't get paid overtime. That's our regular work day, and we volunteer for that position. Almost all of them were volunteer, but they did have the towing on all 3 of those floats. So they had it hooked up to a big city truck, and they towed it, because when you tow it, you can drive it faster, so it didn't take them as long to get where they were going. But there was no further outlay of money, because they took off that Thursday and worked a regular day on Saturday, and there was no overtime. So they were parks and recreation employees that volunteered to do the floats.
Public works employees here.
Or whatever, yeah, whatever that.
Today you're going to have one of these employees driving.
Yeah.
So those are the discussions. We'll try to get, if you would can we send these questions? If you've got questions, let's send them to Kelsey as quickly as we can. We can get those questions answered by the administration, the ones that are appropriate, and then that'll give us also an opportunity to get them back to you, and you can get in your own mind some of the things that you would like to think about regarding this. So we will bring this back. I think it's something that we owe to Miss Provo to have this conversation, so that they know what they're doing here. This is really
You want to discuss today on the pageant too?
What's that?
Or we need to discuss the pageant?
And I think we need to discuss the pageant. They've been going hand in hand together, and I think it's important for us to do that.
I'll make a motion to facilitate discussion. Okay?
That would be great.
I make a motion that we allocate $10,000 to this program pageant as we did last year.
Okay, George, can we have it? Go ahead. Is there a second? Dave?
It's already in the proposed, the motion just concurs what's already inserted in the budget draft.
Right, it's in the draft right now.
So,
okay, and I think we ought to have.
If we don't have support of the council, we need to take it out of the draft.
And I would just like to continue this for 1 week, for 2 weeks, and have that, if you're going to motion for that, I hate to approve it without the emotion, is all I'm saying.
Okay,
I
will withdraw my motion.
Have the motion without the discussion. But we don't have time for that discussion right now. Kelsey, you have the motion.
Just one thing from Karen's talk, she said that if the council's interested in having this make this a hot topic, just to keep that in mind, and we can coordinate that through email if that's something you're
And I think that would be appropriate. If we can do something like that, just get a little, I'd make that motion that we put it on.
let her draft it, and then we'll go through our normal procedure, which is to ask council to approve it or not approve it.
That way we can get a little bit of feedback from the people of Provo if they're interested in this. If it's all right, I think we need to have the discussion on both of those. And we've taken more time on this than we had a lot of it. I think it's something we need to have a discussion around. Okay, thank you. We'll be back here in 2 weeks to discuss both of those, but it gives the council an opportunity to think about it and then get a few questions answered.
And how do we get in touch with Kelsey? She has been emailing, she's been emailing you. Okay, good. So you are in touch with her. Thank you very much. We appreciate your support.
Thank you.
And the city appreciates your support and the fact that you will think of doing it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the Municipal Wastewater Planning Program. And Rebecca Andrus is going to be doing this for us. Thank you.
thank you for taking the time to go through this. This is part of our sanitary sewer management program that's state mandated as part of our permit, a discharge permit that's for the collection system, which is similar to the discharge permit for the treatment plant. And it's under the Department of Water Quality and under the Utah code that gives the Water Quality Board authority to regulate discharges to any waters of the state. The difference between the discharge permit, though, for the treatment plant and the discharge permit for the collection system is the goal for the collection system is actually not to discharge. So we don't actually want any waters getting out of the collection system into anything except for the treatment plant. So part of this is to allocate adequate resources, to establish a proper rate structure, and to provide adequate capacity. I'm kind of going through some of the basis behind the reasoning for this. We did this a couple of years ago, but for some of you that are new on the council, and this is kind of a refresher for some of you who haven't done this for a couple of years, we'll just kind of run through this really quick. So this general permit is required for everybody in the state who has a sewer system. There are two parts that we're required to have. First part is a sanitary sewer management plan, and the second part is a system evaluation and capacity assurance program, shortened to a CCAP. So the sanitary sewer system management plan is basically our guiding document that helps us to schedule, prioritize, make sure that we're cleaning the system, monitoring, and going through and evaluating everything that's going on to minimize and make sure that we don't have any SSOs or sanitary sewer overflows, and that we minimize any impacts of any overflows that occur. So it has several parts to it: the operation and maintenance program, sanitary sewer overflow action plan, which is essentially the response activities, notifications, corrective actions. It also has a grease, oil, and sand management plan. If we get any of those in the system, that can cause backups. Monitoring measurement plan. So a lot of the monitoring that we are doing right now actually plays very well into this plan. And basement backup program. These pictures on the side here are actually part of our maintenance that we have been doing. They've been doing a lot of patching of the pipes. So we go out and we find infiltration into the system, and then we have patching that we can go into the pipes and actually snake these in. They expand, they dry them in the pipes, and they make a nice solid barrier that locks out any infiltration. So pretty amazing what we can do now. We also make sure our lift stations are clean, and definitely makes a difference in how well our systems work. The system evaluation capacity assurance program, as I said, the CCAP, we make sure that our system is modeled and master planned properly. We monitor the flows and make sure that we don't have surcharges or issues with the system. We've talked a lot about our monitoring that we're doing. And after we finish the monitoring on the system, we will go back and update our CCAP and look at all of the areas and make sure that we've got, we're evaluating any areas that need to be upgraded and add that to that CCAP. So, and then This that we're doing today is the annual self-assessment report. It's required to be completed every year. It has several things that it does. One, it meets the annual reporting requirements of the sanitary sewer management plan and the program. The completing of the forms actually gives our operators CEUs, and it helps to make sure that we are it helps us on the priorities for the funds in the SRF. So when we go to the state to get funds for our potential treatment plant project, these scores within the system actually show that we need those funds. So, are there any questions about the? Yes.
I just have a question. We seem to have had more overflow problems in the past, around Tippy High School, for example, in those neighborhoods that I'm more familiar with. Why is it that we have less today? Are we just doing a better job? We just maintain it better? What's happened?
Several things this year. One, our overall flows are down in the system, and part of that is because we have been very aggressively making sure that we catch infiltration problems as we go. Another thing is just the flows at the treatment plant are down in general, and so we don't have a lot of infiltration into our system. So that's also playing a factor, and we're just.
Well, I think maybe even 10 years ago, I mean, it seemed like there was, when I was on the council previously, there were many more complaints that I've had this time. So something's going well, it seems.
Yeah, our crews have been very aggressively taking care of infiltration. And as I showed earlier, we are patching a lot of infiltration issues as we find them. And we have been getting larger patching kits and ones that can take care of bigger and bigger problems. So our crews have been able to deal with a lot of things in-house that they didn't used to be able to deal with. So we've been able to deal with them more aggressively. Yes.
It seems that this report's broken into three parts: financial, collections, and mechanical, which I believe is just the treatment.
The treatment plant, yes.
It looked like the scores for the collection and treatment plant are awesome. Better than I remember from last year even.
Fairly good, yeah.
But I mean, I would say they're doing awesome. You guys, I think it speaks to the competence of the division, and that's awesome. You go to the financial report, and I mean, I would say that's a failing grade that we have. And it reminds me, it seems to kind of be a common theme in Provo that we have amazing employees, staff that are doing a great job with the resources that we're giving them, but we've been underfunding what we're doing. And so to me, it makes it all the more amazing that you have such great performance on these things. I know we're talking about rates and how we're going to fund a new treatment plant and all of that stuff. So I think we're on the right path. But this report just drove home to me just that kind of imbalance. So let me echo, I think what George was saying is a great job. Thank you for the quality service that you provide us, and just to the council, let's make sure in this and all the areas. And I think we've been doing great the last few years. Let's make sure that we're properly funding the services that we're requesting, because I think this report is kind of a reflection that sometimes we do that.
Yes, thank you. I definitely agree with that.
So looking, what do we need to do with this from now on? Is this just the report that you need to make, or is it
so
looking for?
The main purpose of this report is so that the council is aware of exactly what Councilman Harding just said, is that they see what is going on within the system, and that the council understands the different issues that are being faced by the collection system. Because the goal of the sanitary sewer management program is that the council knows that the system needs to be funded, because if the system is underfunded, regardless of how well the employees do in trying to take care of it, over time, it will start to fail and issues will start to happen that the staff can't keep up with. And so the state wants to make sure that it's properly funded, staff is properly allocated, that master planning and everything is taken care of appropriately, so that over time, sanitary sewer overflows do not happen, and we continue to move forward in taking care of the system and making sure that everything is done in an appropriate way.
And we will be, we do that during this meeting, or is it in the council meeting?
So we'll do it in the council meeting tonight.
Tonight. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll go over this again tonight so that the public can see and talk about it, and see that everything that happens, and then we'll approve this by resolution, and then it will be delivered to the state, and they'll receive that, and we'll go from there.
Okay, very good. Any other questions before? It is on the agenda for tonight. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And we'll turn the time over to Dave Decker, discussion on the water treatment plant variance resolution.
Thank you very much, Chair Winterton, and I'll make sure that we pass on those comments to our collections and our treatment plant people. They do just a fantastic job and have done for a number of years. So I appreciate those comments. Very, very quickly, just a short update, and this is in preparation for a couple of things that are going to be happening, mostly next council on May 15th. Just a quick reminder, you've seen this slide before, and it relates to a variance letter that was submitted to the state back in December. So just a brief history. Several years ago, the state Division of Division of Water Quality implemented some phosphorus regulations, and there's a deadline with those regulations in 2020. And with those regulations, they allowed municipalities and districts to apply for a variance. Provo City submitted a variance letter request back in December of 2017, just last December. And the state granted us that variance. They did put some deadlines, some requirements when they granted that variance. And a summary of those deadlines is shown on this page. And you'll notice the first deadline is June of this year. And we had anticipated that this deadline would be coming. And it requires the city to indicate to the state what our intent is as far as upgrading or making some improvements to our treatment process, and just kind of steer us down a path. So the original variance letter gave us three options: upgrading the existing facility, a new facility by phase implementation, or a brand new facility, just full capacity. And as we've talked with the council about this in the past number of months, the council gave us direction some time ago to eliminate upgrading the existing facility. That's why it's been crossed out. The option number two that's identified here is the staff's recommendation that we phase in a new treatment process, and that's included in the resolution that you will see. And that resolution is not on tonight's agenda. It would be on the 15th of May, and so we came just in advance to try to help the council understand the schedule on the 15th. In addition to that item on the 15th in the regular meeting, on the work session on the 15th, we have a lengthy presentation. I think we requested at least 60 minutes, and I think we just recently asked for 90 minutes. We have our consulting group coming back and making a presentation to the council on the 15th. Relative to the siting, there'll be some discussion about the phased approach here, and a good time for the council to ask a lot of questions. So just a quick reminder on the other two dates that will be coming, one in May of 19, one in December of 19. And again, just additional understandings and commitments that the city needs to make and the city council needs to acknowledge as we move toward some final decisions. So the resolution that you'll see on the 15th, and I think Rebecca just handed out a hard copy to each of the council members. We've had some discussion. I think it's been reviewed from our legal department. There may be some minor modifications between now and the 15th, but you can look through the variance letter. We've tried to identify very quickly the history, why we're doing this. You will, one of the requirements that I actually didn't note it right here. I actually should have noted it. In the variance letter, the resolution has to include an approximate budget for the facility upgrade. And you can see down at the bottom and then onto the next page, I believe, is where we indicate actually the top full paragraph on the next page, where we've tried to be very careful and indicate that that we are implementing a phased-in approach for this facility. The preliminary estimates that have been given to the city are in the range of $220 million for the full capacity, which may be broken into multiple phases and spread over multiple years. And we've done that intentionally to try to provide the most amount of flexibility to the city. And I recognize there has been some conversation about, do we just simply build a full facility? And I think we have still that ability, even with this resolution, if we want to call it one phase, it's still a phased facility. I know somebody will say, well, you're stretching it a little bit there, Dave, but I think it provides and meets the intent of the state the way we've written it. So unless there's any other questions, that's really, there's a little bit of background here, but I think we've done plenty of background and I've given much of that to the council verbally today. So unless there's any questions on the resolutions or what's going to happen in the next few weeks relative to this, that's the end of my presentation. So.
Anyone got any questions for Dave around this? And this will be presented then in 2 weeks to the city council
in the regular session, 2 weeks. And then in the work session, also 2 weeks from today, we'll have probably a 90-minute conversation about siting study. And then again, any questions that the council might have.
The resolution says whereas on May 1st, 2018, that's going to happen.
We'll fix that. Yeah, we've got a couple of, I noticed there was a couple of minor things that we needed to fix on it, and we'll highlight those in the regular session so that council can see the differences.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're now scheduled for a 5-minute break, and we'll go ahead and take that at this time. Ready to go?
Again, sometimes can't print it out.
We welcome you back. We'll move on to item number 6, a discussion on the program year 2018 annual action plan for 4th year update to the 2015 consolidated plan, including CDBG and home funding recommendations. And Dan Gonzalez will present this.
Thank you. So every year we are required to submit an update to the comp plan. The update is the annual action plan, and this is for the use of both CDBG and home funds. And part of that of the submission is creating the draft of the plan and opening a 30-day comment period for public comment from anybody that wishes to read it and make any comments about it. We have scheduled two public hearings for that. The first one will be tonight, and the second one will be on June 5th, which is after the 30-day period has been completed. So far, we have received some comments, and there was I don't know if you had a chance to look at Exhibit A is the action plan, and at the very end there is an appendix with comments. We did a couple of surveys in the fall to citizens and some of the subrecipients that received the funding, and in that appendix you will see all the responses that we've received. It's like I don't know, 5, 6 pages, maybe a little more than that. Yes.
So this is the plan. It's pretty much the same as it's been for several years. I mean, it's changed a little bit, but.
Sure, yes.
And so if what's being presented right now, if based on feedback, it may change, but at what point is it kind of locked in place so that it becomes?
On June 6th.
And then that guides it for the next year, as in people next fall would be making applications based on the plan that we have in place.
Yes. Yes, so with tonight's public hearing, or at any time before we actually submitted to the final plan, I think I'm guessing here what you're referring to. But if there are any changes of the practices or goals or whatever it is that we're looking for to do, this is the time to do it. Basically, that process can begin for the following year as soon as we've submitted the plan for the prior year. So coming back to your question, in guiding the process for next year, we basically have these 30 plus days to make any adjustments or changes that are wanted or needed. Yes.
Okay, so and by year, we're talking fiscal years, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So right now, we've got this 30-day window, and that's going to set in motion what we do starting June, July, and then
July 1st.
July 1st, and running for a year. So for example, if the council said, we like this, but we want to make this change, I mean, would that be difficult to do now because we're so late in the game? We've already gone through a process of selecting CDBG.
It depends on what type of change you want. If you want to change in the process itself, yes, it would be late, because what you would like to see is a different approach to the applications, the process of submitting them, the process of evaluating them. Yeah, we're kind of late in the game on that. But it's your decision. If you want to do something like that, what it would do is it would delay, right? We wouldn't submit the action plan until whatever changes are adopted, and it would delay when we submit it and when we are actually able to use the funding.
So we've had this process in play for quite a while. It was last December or to January that people submitted their applications.
Right.
And then they were reviewed, and so we're going forward. Everyone's acting in good faith, and we really can't, in my opinion, change dramatically where we're going to be spending the money in the next year. But what I'm looking at is sending the right message for next fall for when they apply for the subsequent round of funding, and say, well, we may want something different.
Right. Yeah, I would agree that it would be detrimental to make any changes for the funding that is presented now. It hasn't been done before. There's nothing except your decision to whether to make it now or later. But again, as soon as we submit this plan to HUD, you can have as many conversations and discussions and move forward to making any adjustments or changes you wish for the year following.
So if we do want to make changes for next year's guidelines, the deadline for those recommendations is when? 30
Probably
days?
around this time next year. Does that make sense?
So I think the question is
You can start having those conversations and having those discussions with public or subrecipients or whoever you want to include in the process. As soon as we submit this plan, the deadline to submit whatever changes are made would be around the same time that we are now next year.
Although if we want to guide who applies for what, we need to get it done before they apply.
We probably should have that done by the beginning of October. Late September would be the best.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't catch that part of the process. but yes. So with the action plan, we include the activities that are being proposed to be funded. And as it has been mentioned now, the process began in December of last year with pre-application submitted, final application submitted in February. Advisory committees joining or getting together within 4 or 5 different occasions, depending on the committee itself, and providing recommendations for funding. So can you put up Exhibit B? All right. Notice the number in red there at the top. We always work with an estimated number of what we think we may get. That number was based on analysis of the trends of what we've received in prior years. However, I'm sure you've heard some of the things that happened with the appropriation process for the federal budget. The final budget that was approved had an actual increase on both CDBG and home. And just a few minutes before I headed up here, I received an email that had those amounts. I'm just giving you these numbers to think about, but we'll work with the numbers that are here. But for CDBG, the final number is $1,229,028. So it's an increase of about $144,000 and change in what we estimated. When we come back in June 6th, we will have the actual amounts, and you can also give input as to what the process will be for the allocation of those funds. Anyway, this worksheet shows the administration, how all the funding would be allocated. This is a pointer, right? This? Okay, so based on that number estimated, we add any program income received from the prior fiscal year and any activities that have either been finished or for some reason were canceled. So in addition of 288 and change of dollars to reprogram, we're working with a total number of $1,373,786. We are allowed to use up to 20% of the entitlement amount. So that 217 is a reflection, 20% of the estimated amount to administer everything that we do with CDBG. These 3 lines indicate we run some programs from the RDA, the egress window program, the down payment assistance program, the facade program, and these numbers are used to fund the program delivery, and that's the face-to-face contact we have with individuals in those programs. This number, public services section, we can allocate up to 15%, again, of the entitlement grant to public service agencies. And again, this number is based 15% of the $1,085,000. All right. The next figures that you see is this is how it was funded last year, and what is recommended to be funded for the current year. Down here you have the capital projects. So that's the difference of that 15% and the 20%, and these dollars that are allocated for program delivery. These are the different applicants, the amounts that they have requested, any amounts that they still have available for the program or projects, how much they were funded the prior year, and these numbers in some cases include these numbers. These are not in addition to this. It's just what was funded last year. And then finally, the recommendation from this committee to how to fund capital projects. Any questions? Yes.
Just
just really quick, under program delivery, so there's a 20% administration of CDBG generally, and then you also have administration of those programs. Those dollars aren't going to egress windows, that's going to the administration of the program of the egress window.
Yes.
Program.
Yes, this amount sadly is not sufficient to cover the costs. So we use that.
Is there
to supplement.
Is there somewhere else that shows how much money is going to the down payment assistance program?
With CDBG funds, we are not, that there's not a recommendation to fund down payment assistance.
Gotcha.
There is with home funds, but not with CDBG.
With home funds. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Yes, Mr. Sewell?
Will you be updating the recommendations based on the new number before we vote on it?
Yes. And tonight you will be hearing from the committee chairs from both the Capital Projects Committee and the Public Services Committees. When they met, I always ask them to think of how would we fund if we get either more or less, typically less than this amount. For this particular committee, the recommendation was that if there was an increase on the amount received, that would go to the 200 East bicycle project. Any difference? As you can see, most of the projects were funded to the amount that was requested. In some cases, we didn't fund, or the committee didn't fund because there was enough funding to carry on with the project itself. Does that help? Okay. Any other questions with this? And again, tonight you won't be making any decisions as whether to fund this or not. This is just starting the process. The actual decision, the resolution, would be approved on June 6th. Okay. Can we look at the next exhibit? Okay, so this is that 15% that we were talking about, the 162,750. This is for public services. And what you see here is what was awarded to each of these organizations for the prior year. This last column shows, these numbers were effective as of February, how much money was still available for them to draw down. This column shows the requests, 40 in total, and this is what the committee has recommended to fund.
Question.
Yes.
So in some years past, the amount was less than 15% that was allocated. I don't know if it went as low as 10%.
7.5.
Really?
Wow. And that was based on council decision to
Right.
go that low.
And having served on that committee and gone and visited, I mean, I served 7 years and then I've sat in on some, but when you go to those people and you see what they do with the money, and they have to document it, I'm an advocate of the full 15%.
Yes, and in a meeting, I believe it was last year, the council decided that that's how much would be funded. 15%, no less than that.
And
that's how we're working with right now.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but
yes.
Do you have a feeling, I mean, it just seems like even at 15%, some of these people are still struggling. And at 7.5, I can't imagine what they would do. So since you work with some of these people, have you seen the impact of us going from the 7.5 to the 15 and what the impact would be if we reverse that someday in the future? Because I like to think that we would keep it at the 15.
Right. Well, these organizations are resourceful. Obviously, the 15% helps them quite a bit. If for whatever reason, because sometimes even what they request is not even funded to the number, they find ways to do it. But that's just more work for them to find other funding sources and whatnot. So it does benefit them that at least we could do the 15% that we can allocate to them.
And is it fair to say that the money that we put into these social organizations come back several times to the community because of the problems they're addressing.
Yes, it does. Yep. All right, any questions on this exhibit? Any other questions? Given that the final number is 144,000 higher, what would be available to fund here would be obviously more than this. What this committee decided to do in the event that there were more funding available was to fund to 100% the applicant's recommendations based on their scoring. And so, for example, right here, what is it? Over here. Yeah. Anyway, so with the highest total score, that would be the first applicant that we would bring to 100%, and they go from there until the total allocation of 50% is exhausted. That is the committee's recommendation.
Scores based on what?
The score is based. Oh, sorry. I don't know how I do that. There we go. Based on the application itself, there's a selection priorities criteria, and then the scoring of the application itself. So the total weighted score comes from that. The priorities being, in this document that we're talking about, the comp plan, the action plan, the council decided to give priority to certain type of activities. And then in the application itself, it weighs different sections of the application with a points number that comes to the total application of the score of the application. It evaluates what the project does. It evaluates how the organization is set up to do it. What is the return on the funding that is invested? A number of things.
Yeah, I guess the only concern I would have, and I can't really think of a scenario, not having seen these kinds of applications, but there might be, you might have an organization that, for whatever reason, scored lower on the application, but still merits more funding than.
Merits and what? So this is part of the reason why these are set that way. Sure, there are organizations that always will be needing more money than others, but again, and there was a CD that was made available to council. I don't know how that was distributed to council staff, that had all the applications and it had all the materials, including the application guide, the scoring system. We provided that about a month ago or so. So anyway, it's based on those documents, and again, council priorities as to. There's been some discussion of, is it a shotgun approach to fund all these? Because sometimes we've received 28 applications, 28 different agents. And sometimes the committees would recommend to fund as little as $1,000 to an organization. While it may be seen as helpful to fund an organization with $1,000, we really do them a disservice because of the heavy requirements that come with this funding. If they receive $1,000 or $25,000, they still have to meet all these requirements in reporting, in doing all these things that they need to meet. When they're receiving $1,000, that tends to be quite heavy on them for the amount of money that they're receiving. On the other hand, there's also.
I'm going to ask you to continue this discussion for the council members tonight. Sure. This will be coming back, and he will be doing this presentation tonight. We're about 20 minutes behind right now, so I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you to, if there's council members that have concerns about this or have questions move further, we'll ask you tonight if it's okay.
Sure. If I could just have them just look at the next exhibit, which is the home funding.
Yeah, we'll give you 2 minutes. We'll give you 3 minutes.
You just need to look at it. That's all. So that's again what we estimated to receive. This is program income or other projects that are reprogrammed here, total of $2,077,000, and down below the recommendations for funding. As you can see, these either meet the request or go above the request, because this never happens. The requests were lower than the funding that we actually had to fund. Now, one thing to be prepared for as well is this was an estimated number. The number that HUD came back with is $1,515,000. So it's $450,000 almost of additional funding. And all of these requests have already been come up to 100%. Now, the recommendation from my side would be to fund any, I can't control how far this goes, fund any of the applications received here. I would discourage, if there's the idea, to have a new project or a new agency to receive funding that has not gone through the process that each of these organizations went through. I would discourage you to do that because it's unfair, especially if they did not submit an application. So that's my time.
So we'll look to see where we want to put that extra funding. Is that what you're saying?
Actually had to allocate it between those that applied.
Oh, that's already been allocated to those that.
It has not been allocated.
Okay.
What I'm saying is
it's already
we're
recommended.
recommending where to allocate it amongst
Okay,
those that
so
applied.
I see that. Okay. Very good.
Right.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any more questions, he'll be here tonight to entertain those questions. We'll now move on to item number 7, a discussion on increment financing, and Dixon will be leading that discussion.
Well, so this is really your discussion. I passed out a document that our staff came up with the administration. And again, this is an hour-long presentation or discussion. I don't have a presentation that's going to last an hour. I can give a high overview in about maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then would just love to hear your conversation and feedback to get some direction or let you debate this policy discussion on the appropriateness and the usefulness and when, why, and how incentives are given. And incentives is a word that's often used. And when someone says incentives, this is what we think of in our office. But yet incentives could be, could really comprise any number of things here. And you can read what I have here, but this is just for the viewing public if they want to, if they can see that. So, so why are incentives given? To encourage a desired use, to remain competitive, a catalyst for change, quality of life, products and service offerings. We want something to happen sooner because we just outright want something. We want to partner with businesses. We want to make a marginal project better or feasible, protecting what we have, increase tax revenue later, preserve the base. It's always about the new money. Business-friendly city support, creating an environment for other things to happen, and then, you know, for future generations, what we're able to get with the return on investment. And then we came up, you know, so those are some reasons why incentives might be given. They're not maybe the only reasons. There could be other reasons why we would do an incentive. In fact, you as a council could make a decision right now that we're done with incentives. Just cut it off, we're done. And you can do that if you believe that growth or other projects will happen without them. And that's not illegal or immoral. It's just an opportunity cost. It would be really cool to live in a utopian world or have a little incubator, this little side set that we could do that and see what happens. I don't know if you want to gamble that way, but you could. So some of the principles that we use as we consider these incentives, and again, recognizing that You don't see everything that we ever talk about or hear about. In fact, most of them you don't. It's usually just the bigger ones are where we think it's going to make a difference. And if you could just scroll up there, Kelsey, as we go. But so it's always post-performance. I think we have someone in there, but the city just doesn't write a check. In fact, I'm not aware of many cities who do. There are some states who do. And oftentimes, these aren't even the incentives that the state deals with. And generally, the state is only involved in actually true economic development, and retail isn't really true economic development. It's just spending a buck through the community. It does add to quality of life, so not to dismiss it, but if you go to an economic development conference, very little is actually said about retail. And not that all this is retail, but a lot of it is about retail. And that's where most of the discussion has come from. But anyways, post-performance, we use the but-for rule. You know, again, but for our participation, this may or may not happen. And part of the challenge is we don't always know, but we try to at least on the face value say, but for our participation, this is or is not going to happen. We're trying to close a gap. Again, there may be some market externalities. This is very evident down in Mountain Vista. For a very short time, we said, we're just going to sell property for what the appraisal is, and we'll just see how that works. And all the people we were working with said, well, when you're ready to talk about what the reality of this property is worth, we'll talk some more. But if you want to sell it at full price value according to your appraisal, we're done. And that didn't last very long. And so again, we don't give the property away, but we get to a price that seems appropriate for their interest to develop it.
Dixon, got a question on that.
Yeah, stop me anytime, please.
Does that just mean that our appraisal's worthless?
No, because
when you say stop the gap, if we can't sell it for what it's worth,
yeah,
what good's the appraisal?
So if you have a piece of ground that has no challenges to it, and you have a willing buyer, willing seller, then that appraisal is very helpful. But if you have a piece of ground and the appraiser doesn't know all the challenges with the property, so at Mountain Vista, it's a known quantity that there's some challenges down there. And the appraisers have no idea what it's going to take to make this property buildable or what they're going to have to put into it. But a contractor does, a developer does, and that's where we factor that into it. But you have a piece of ground out on the west side, or it's been commercial, it's been something else before, maybe here in downtown. Those appraisals are very accurate, the ones in Mountain Vista, and they will say, if all things being considered, if this is shovel ready and everything is up to speed, utilities are in, there's no additional groundwork because of either residual contamination or structural issues, this is what the price would be. Well, we know those issues, those conditions don't exist the way they do. It's the same way at the golf course. We had some ideas on what it is, what the challenges are, but we have not done all the detailed information. And we could spend a lot of money trying to figure that out, which then means we try to recoup that cost. And rather than do that, we just say we take some expert opinions, they give us their best ballpark idea, and then we work with them, try to get to that value.
And I still struggle with that. What good's the appraisal? I mean, this is what we think it is, but we're not going to stand by it, and we recognize that it's not right.
Well, what it does though, Gary, gives us a baseline to start from.
Okay.
And the baseline assumption is that the property is shovel ready and there are no problems or concerns. And if everybody knows there's no problems and concerns, then you say that appraisal is very good. But if you know there's problems and concerns, but you don't know what they're going to cost to fix, you at least have a baseline to start from on saying, well, they're saying it's worth this, but we know it's going to cost $50,000 to overcome this challenge. And the appraiser may or may not have that information, but an expert would.
Can't we just give it to him so that he can make it a more legitimate?
Yeah, but then the appraiser is the one that signs that appraiser, not the expert. Dave?
I'm guessing that from sitting in some RDA meetings last year, it seemed that we used the appraisal and said, okay, we're going to sell it to you for what the appraisal says, but all of the site work that you do gets deducted from that purchase price, but it can't go less than zero. And so we use that appraised value to kind of set what the value of land is minus, and then they just kind of, whatever money they put into fixing the land came off of that purchase price.
And again, usually that happens on troubled properties. again, property downtown on the west side, we usually don't have that issue.
So, if you were selling a house and it had a certain value based on location and square footage and potential use, but it's a total fixer-upper, and you go, well, it needs to be improved, needs to be plumbing, and I'm gonna subtract this, and this. I don't know how much for the termites. And
It's usually not the appraiser who makes those determinations.
Exactly.
Somebody else.
And again, I get that, but I struggle with the appraiser.
Oh, yeah.
Jumping in and say, these are the things that I get, and why, I don't understand why they need to put it so high when they know there's those problems.
that's where the market is.
And that's what the caveats are. Those appraisals are typically full of caveats saying you need to have somebody else make a determination. They're just telling you what they've seen in the market on similar pieces, if it were equal to the others without the problems.
Okay, and I'll deal with that. I get that.
And believe me, we struggle with that one too. Okay, so we don't write checks. I'm not aware of the city ever writing a check as an incentive just to say, Mr. Developer or property owner, end user, here's your check, please come. We don't do that. Not all deals are created equally. That's evidenced even here with the last three tax incentive deals that we've done. Again, on the Parkway, comparing that to East Bay. Again, one was to backfill vacant space. The other one was to take out a space on the Parkway to take out the pizza place there. We want to make sure that they have some skin in the game, that they have some money into it, that we're not the only one that's making a contribution to make this project happen. When people come in and ask about incentives, my staff knows its first answer is we just say, no, there are no incentives. But we do want to have a conversation. And the reason we want to have a conversation is I'd hate to pass up a deal that the gap was that big. And so we want to understand, but the short answer is always just no. There isn't anything we can do to help you, but let's talk and see how interesting your project is. But there isn't just this standing, we'll give you a bucket of cash. It's got to be a conscious decision, right? We don't want it to just kind of go to default and, well, no one would make a decision, so this is what we did. Well, no, we want to make, it needs to be a conscious decision. There's an opportunity cost in either doing it or not doing it. On either side of that, you're always going to give up something. We want to, we're typically only giving incentives on what they control. So again, we don't give this big area and say you can gather all the increment from this area. No, it's just what you own as a developer. And again, a couple of these in East Bay and at the Parkway, it was just what they owned, what those developers owned. We weren't giving them money from across the street or property next door. It's usually for as short as period as possible, short of a period as possible, and usually just what we're, again, trying to close that gap, so enough to get the deal done. Oftentimes we'll set a dollar amount. So again, using Parkway Village and East Bay, we knew it was $1.5 million. We limited it to 10 years. If they get the $1.5 million before that, then we're done. If they go to 10 years and they only get half of that, we're still done. So we try to cap it either by time or by a dollar amount, not leave it open-ended. Opt-in, these are negotiated. So again, these are typically on property tax. We can't go to the school district and force them to be a member to participate, or with the county. Part of the principles on the statewide sales tax system, that's what they incentivize. The state incentivizes sales tax. They don't actually incentivize jobs as far as the local economy. We could bring all the jobs here we want. We have great employment, but it doesn't do anything directly to our sales tax as far as a bottom line. So if we have some large employers that do a lot of things in our community, but if you go to our sales tax revenue, you won't find their names there and see how much sales tax they paid, but we do see our retailers doing so. We go to where the money is, and it's through sales tax. If the formula were to shift and suddenly it was 100% population, you'd probably see a lot more communities doing things differently than just going for the sales tax. They'd probably be building a little more houses because they know the more housetops they have, the more of that sales tax they're going to get. And that's a statewide discussion. And that's where we can talk about point of sale versus population. The car dealerships, the ones that were done about 20 to 22, 23 years ago, they actually went in, put in all their utility improvements. Okay, so they front loaded it and then they got paid back over time. So again, it was still post-performance, and had they not performed, they wouldn't have gotten the money back to pay for the improvements that they had actually paid for up front. The mall did the same thing. When John Price built the mall, the property tax incentive was used to pay them back for the improvements that they put in up front. They put all those, not the city, but they did. And so that's how that deal was structured. And then again, I think we talked about this. That's redundant. It's skin in the game. You roll up now on that. So again, not that far. Just need to go. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got my directions wrong. So just right here. That's good. So again, as I said from the very beginning, we could actually stop doing incentives completely if we believe the project will happen without the participation. And we do, and we've used the concept, or we talked about, it's a race to the bottom, and it's true. It is a race to the bottom, but everybody's in the race. I've talked about a countywide approach of not giving incentives. That needs to not be a countywide conversation. I go to these economic development conferences, and someone will raise their hand from Poughkeepsie, and they'll say, yeah, it'd be great if we didn't have to do incentives, and everyone agrees. And then you got one guy that says, nope, sorry, we're gonna keep doing incentives. So everybody keeps doing incentives because you want to remain competitive. Because but if you think it's not gonna happen, or it's gonna happen on its own, why would we give an incentive? If I was the community to the north and someone came in and they were a great user, but we already had one, or we weren't trying to fill the gap, but we'd say, hey, we'd love to have you here. And if you want to be here, that's great, but there just is no incentive for you. We're not offering you anything. Yes.
So if nobody offered incentives, it would happen somehow on its own.
Yeah.
But there would be no guarantee as to who would be the recipient. So the guy raises his hand, he wants to be the recipient.
Yeah, it becomes a very vicious cycle. So we do it because others do it, stay competitive. Then you could also talk about a threshold, and that's probably where we're at. So I think I've talked with all of you that we don't anticipate continuing to bring the council and the administration incentives to consider. As I look out, I see one for the mix, the mall, the Riverwoods, and maybe a West Side grocery store. And that's only if you approve them. But as far as deals that we would bring to you that would need an incentive, I really don't see much beyond that. And you may not even see those four, and if you don't, that's fine too. But if you ask me, that's kind of what we're looking at. And so again, the idea is what we're trying to get us over that hump so these things happen by themselves. If you look at the projects that I just mentioned, most of those, the mix, the mall, the Riverwoods, don't actually include our big powerhouse retail sales tax generators. And they're developers, they're larger properties, and they're trying to get something going or change, make a difference there to make something happen. It's currently not happening.
Can I have a quick question on that?
Yeah.
So you named four. Mm-hmm. Do you foresee those as being property tax or sales tax?
I see them maybe potentially being a combination. Some of them may be property tax only, some of them may be a combination of. So the last three that we've done have been retail only. And as far as CDAs that we've done in the last, Dave, as long as you have been here, how many property tax deals have we done? And those were not sales tax deals.
One for City View Apartments.
Duncan.
And Duncan Aviation, and we're getting ready to switch the one for downtown development.
And we have Mountain Vista.
We have Mountain Vista.
But how many CDA areas do we have in the city?
Currently have 8.
Okay, and of those 8, none of them have sales tax deals in them. Is that correct? Those are just property tax only. Okay, so and the sales tax deal that was in place for the car dealerships is now over and has been for a number of years. So currently on the books, we have 8 CDA areas and 3 sales tax agreements that are sitting out there right now.
And how many of those CDA areas have actual
Projects going?
projects? Do you know?
So the CBD project area is expired. The South University one only has the City View Apartments. Duncan Aviation has its sole one around there. The project area number 4 is for the mall. There is a downtown, it's not the CBD, but there's another downtown project area that hasn't been activated as yet. And then there was one that was for the benefit of the Covey Center.
And the one at Mountain Vista is just really on just the property that Provo City owned that wasn't offered to.
So we are in the
private.
process of getting ready to extinguish the tax increment for the Covey Center because we've reached the point where we can pay back the bonds. So I think we're actually a little bit ahead of the game on that.
So again, this isn't too much different on when to give incentives. Again, we're trying to encourage redevelopment. Again, we're trying to grow the base. Again, when we have done even the retail deals or the property tax deals, we always preserve the base. And again, these deals don't last forever. There are a few that have come back to do a refresh. And that's probably the one that you'll see from the mall, from Provo Town Center.
Dixon, when you talk about preserving the base, I wonder, how do we preserve the base with what they've done out with the mix, for example?
So what of that property, so if
Can I
nothing.
give an example?
Yeah.
Car dealerships. They had already bought the property in Orem on University Parkway, ready to move. So had we not done the sales tax incentive for them, we would have no car dealerships in that whole area right there where we have 4 dealerships. So that's preserving the base.
Well, what I'm thinking about, I look at what the base was 2 years ago and what it is today.
Okay, right. So there's maybe, that term can be used in numerous ways. So to your specific question, Councilmember Winterton, is, so whether something is built or not at the mix right now, they are still paying property tax.
But they're only paying it on raw ground now because they turn out the building.
No.
They're still paying on the assessed value.
Unless it's been readjusted and they've come in and
Even though
asked.
the buildings aren't there.
Until the county reassesses them, they're still paying that value. So for example, when we adopt a redevelopment project area or a CDA, we stipulate to a base year value. Typically that's the assessed value at a given, like the 2016 assessed value. And every taxing entity will get that tax portion that accrues to them at that point. It's only then anything above that as the project area goes on, say it's a 15-year CDA, everybody still gets that base year amount. So for example, on $1,000 taxable value, everybody gets their portion. If it increases after the project area is adopted to 5,000, everybody still gets their amount on the 1,000, but there's a potential share on the 4,000 increase in taxable value.
And I love that. That's great. So it's established at the time the CDA is established, not at the time they come in and apply for the.
Correct.
Okay, that helps me a lot.
Yes. And then you just say, though, it can be lowered because of reassessment by the county.
It could be. And
That's
then
not
there wouldn't be any tax increment.
for a period of time,
Right.
until the new improvements are.
So they have to get back at least to the base period of where it was. So now they're gonna, for example, at the next end, they're gonna lower that assessed value because there's no building there. But that won't make a difference.
Well,
as
have
far
we
as-
not picked the base year on that
I
date?
think we picked 27.
And so then they have to get back up to that
Yes.
base period before they start getting any increment. Okay.
So that's why we call it post-performance. So if they don't perform, if they don't increase the value of the taxable property, or they don't increase their sales tax revenue, we're not giving up anything because they haven't performed. And so we always preserve that base. In fact, the Parkway and out at East Bay, if they don't make their minimums, and that's going to count against them, and they'd have to make that money up too to get anything back. So we're not giving up. It's always on the new money.
Because I've seen people come in and say, well, tear it out like they did have at the mix. Just tear it out and say, well, this is really our base because there's nothing here now. But if you've established it already at the time of the creation of the CDA, that's some protection.
Yeah,
That helps me.
that's in the agreements, that would be the base value.
Thank you.
And the school districts and the county and the city would all get their portion taxed based on it.
Just curious, 2017, they were already turning down buildings. I guess the question is, was it reassessed? It'd be
They
interesting
were
to
actually
see.
taxed, so the way that works, they're taxed in 16 and they pay it in 17. So they,
That's a year back.
again, the other thing we're trying to do is increase our building inventory right now. Our occupancy rate is very high, so our vacancy rate is very low. We're talking about commercial buildings, especially for light manufacturing, warehousing, or just vacant buildings that can be occupied with manufacturing. Again, why we would give an incentive to be a catalyst for development to be over that tipping point. Again, kind of a field of dreams approach that if it's built, they will come. So if we have those buildings that are down there, again, down at Mountain Vista, that's exactly what we did. We built the infrastructure and now the businesses are coming. Again, we're looking for a desirable name, product, or service. If there's something we really wanted or tried to get, again, we might give an incentive based on the location of a development, trying to make something happen there, either trying to create or retain jobs. Again, we're typically working with the developer, not necessarily the end user, and that can be specified in the agreement as we strike the agreement with whoever the entity may be. So again, these are deals that we anticipate that we would bring forward at some point when they're ready. Again, the mall, the Riverwoods, the Mix, and a grocery store on the west side. If you can roll up the types of incentives. So property tax, again, a couple of those that we've done are City View and Mountain Vista. IFA, again, that falls under an incentive, but we ended up buying a piece of property. We made them a loan. Did everybody receive an invite for the council? Okay, for tomorrow or Thursday, I guess it is, Thursday afternoon. We're already getting very good reports that their sales are doing great.
Oh, you've been in the store down there? It's great.
Yeah, and again, so they doubled their size, Dave?
Roughly, yeah, they doubled their size. They're much more accessible to the community, and people can find them much more easily, so they're very happy.
So they're reporting that people are walking in and saying, now, how long have you been in our community? It's like 60 years, but not at this location, but people are discovering them for the first time. I think it was a really good move. I think we were able to help act as a catalyst. Again, sales tax deals, you're familiar, Days Market, Parkway, East Bay. Infrastructure, again, these were incentives for Duncan. Most of the parking structures in downtown that are not federally, state, or city-owned were done with tax increment. Mountain Vista, again, we built roads. On a very limited basis, we've waived some permits. This project Inbox is really interesting. This is a group that wanted to go out to the technology business park. It's the former Novell. Call center, 650 jobs at about $15 an hour, which is not great, but it's also not bad. It's better than retail pay. They were going to have probably 40 or 50 jobs in the $80,000 to $90,000 range, and the site selectors were pushing, not the business, the site selectors were pushing very hard for an incentive. What are the incentives that the city is offering? And we said, well, based on your $400,000 investment, we could probably waive a $4,000 building permit. That's about what we can do, because you're not building a new building, you're not selling anything, you're just not increasing the value here, and that's the best we can do. And if that works for you, great. But if it doesn't, you're still great people, and we'd love to have you. And I don't know if they'll come or not. And again, if they don't, then we just decided that just wasn't a top priority to us, and we weren't going to offer them lots of things that maybe they were hoping for. Now, interestingly enough, the site selectors got paid on commission based on the size of the incentive. Our office doesn't get anything like that. Okay, so we're not on commission. So if the deal is worth $1 million versus $5 million, economic development staff, we still love to be here. We ride our bikes to work, especially on Ride Our Bike to Work Day. But anyway. And then there was another one called the Yoga Underground. This was just a very small business, and it was a yoga shop. And again, yoga shops are awesome if you're into that, but it just wasn't a real high priority. And it's like, there wasn't much we could do to help that one. We can't help everybody. We try where we can, but there just wasn't enough there. Mountain Vista, we've done some land write-downs again. Yes.
Do we know if they came anyway, or is that still?
They did.
So they were already here. They wanted to relocate from one part of the city to another part of the city. And again, we just kind of have to weigh that all, take it into balance and see where it falls out. And again, on something like that, there wasn't really much that we could do to help them.
Did they make the move? Or are they still in the same place?
Yeah, they
So they're on 9th East, over by the gym, or by Boston Gym, on the old Mad Dog cycles. What they wanted was us to waive their permits and also pay for some of their TIs. And once again, we just went through those tenant improvements, and we just went through that list of, what's our return on investment? Is this a priority? Asking all those big picture questions, and unfortunately, we passed on.
Then at Mountain Vista, so this is where, again, we've done some land write-downs where recognizing how much money they'd have to put into the project to make that more equitable there. And then we also use other people's money as incentives. So with the 108 loan, we've got EDA grants, and then we've also used block grant to do some of the facade renovations in the downtown, and those also are seen as incentives. Again, just the recent sales tax that we've been given, I think you're familiar with all those. And then if you could roll up to this last one, business is not given an incentive. Most of these are probably not what I would consider huge. But the Sweeto Burrito, the Even Stevens, right there where Stevenette's used to be, they came because they wanted to. And again, that's where we talk about trying to create an environment or pro-business that we've reached the tipping point and that people kind of come on their own. The Target Express, what was really important to them was to get in and out of the shop, the part at the Riverside Plaza. And so that was, if they got an incentive, that's what it was, that we kind of helped facilitate some things for them to do that. The shops in downtown, most of the shops in downtown, but for maybe the facade grants or a sign, they've kind of recognized that the downtown is a pretty good place to be. But if you think about Wells Fargo and Zions and what New Skin did, the city provided some incentives on infrastructure and parking decks in creating that environment that others want to move to. The Rodizio Grill that backfilled what used to be Tucanos, the developer may have done some incentives there, but the city did not. Provo Beach, which backfilled Copeland Sports up at the Riverwoods, that was done on their own. The Marriott Residence Inn out in front of University Avenue there in front of Provo Town Center Mall, that happened on its own. probably something there between the developer, but the city did not participate other than just, they got their building permits and they paid for them. The Hyatt place, I believe the city has done some stuff on the parking that they'll be using, but as far as the Hyatt itself, and then Bulldog and University, all the way from Chick-fil-A to CVS along Bulldog Boulevard, all that has happened because of what was already there and just seemed to be a desirable place. So all those.
Did these companies actually come to you and say, what can you do for us?
No, they just did their thing.
Okay. So these were not necessarily turned down, but.
No, these just things that just happened on their own. And again, these are not what I would consider huge projects. The Residence Inn and the Hyatt are probably the biggest things there. But at some level, many of the projects that we're working on, the 4 that we've mentioned, they're going to ask for something. They're going to identify a market gap or some challenge that they're trying to overcome. And so they're going to come make a request.
Is there a difference between, I mean, I'm looking at Cubby's on that list is the only one that I can think of. Well, I guess Provo Beach is, I don't know if Provo Beach isn't a chain or anything.
No.
Right? So when you talk about like sort of mom and pop shops, local entrepreneurs that are not franchises.
Yeah, Sweeto Burrito started as a food truck, so I would consider that local.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of stimulating local business and helping local business stay local, just talk me through that a little bit. Are there advantages or disadvantages? I mean, because these are not people who needed any sort of help to stay local. So, whereas Days, I don't think the incentive that was offered there necessarily was to protect them from leaving, but it felt to me like there was a little bit of a dimension to that deal that felt right because they were local. But when does that the fact of being local factor in?
Well, that's why I said where every request or incentive consideration is unique and individual. They're not all the same. We're not necessarily out looking for local businesses to assist or turning down all the national chains because they're national, or it really just depends. And again, we really don't go looking for these. We're not advertising. We're not putting out banners saying, hey, come see us. Most of them come find us. Either because they've seen what we've done for somebody else, or they just, hey, I'm always looking for money, so I'll go ask anybody for money, right? So, and the city's on the list. So again, and again, whether it's local or national, we just kind of, as Chad was saying, we just kind of go through our list mentally and just saying, okay, is there a return on investment here? Is this going to catalyze other things to happen? Does it even make sense? Will it pass the public smell test? Are we getting something that we didn't have before? Those are all things in the list, as you saw. Those are things that we look at. And so it's not really a matter of whether it's local or not. That may be one of the things that we look at. Again, so IFA, you could consider that kind of a mini Home Depot in a way. A lot of the similar things, not entirely, but again, they came and they had a unique offering. It's like, hey, we have a piece of ground that we don't need anymore. There's a piece we'd like to get. And so we just talked to them and tried to refine it as best we could. And there was probably some things that they initially asked for that we weren't or couldn't do, or we didn't think that you would go for. So we didn't bring them up and just tried to package it as best we could, and worked out, and glad that it did. Yes.
Let me just give a couple of examples where the city has really stepped out. The city spent $12 million buying the land for the mall without a mall developer. What happened is the developers would go to Penny's or Sears and say, we'd like to develop a mall at Provo. They say, where? Well, if you'll commit, we'll come. We'd love to come to Provo if you'll commit. And they say, we can't commit without knowing where.
Yeah, it gets very circular very quickly on who goes first.
So the city, that was not post-performance. that was spending $12 million of the city's money to facilitate a development. And then we, in addition to that, of course, did infrastructure. Riverwoods didn't ask for anything. But one other thing on the mall, Nordstrom's would have come to Provo. They offered to come for $14 million. All the incentive they wanted, $14 million. They went to University Mall and failed long term because the market here just isn't what Nordstrom's market. That was a good decision. Riverwoods didn't ask for anything. The mall was willing to give them something and took their key stores away from them. Had we had incentives with Riverwoods, I think we would have had a more successful development. Because they didn't ask and we didn't offer, we lost 3 or 4 major.
And you need to clarify which mall that was doing that, George. It was the University Mall. Yeah.
They were willing to give those incentives, so I think you have to be careful to think that they won't happen if you don't come, and if they do come, have you done enough to make them successful? So those are just 2 examples of what can happen. I don't know that we'll ever be in a position of wanting to buy land again to make a development because retail is so risky today. But anyway, just interesting to what had to happen. They had tried for 25 years to do a mall in Provo and never were successful, only because they never had a location for it. So you had to find. So if there was something like that in the future, maybe we could do something, but I don't know.
Okay, so that was just kind of high level and probably took more time. Again, hopefully this isn't the only time you discuss this, that there'll be other follow-ups. I mean, again, it's really your meeting and your time, and so I don't know what else you wanted to cover, or if there's any other questions that we could answer, or just.
I think this is something that the council needs to discuss. I don't feel that we have a policy, and Dixon, I think sometimes I struggle with saying a policy that this is what we will do no matter what. Because I look at the tenants that are coming in, I don't know that we can say that. I hope.
So that's why guiding principles, again, if you were to scroll now back the other way, Kelsey, to some of the guiding principles that we looked at as just the principles there. Most of those apply at some level or another as we look at these, and these are not formal, they're not written down, but it's what we use as a staff as we look at projects. There's kind of the 2 extremes where it's a very formulaic and it's a spreadsheet or a grid or an application you fill out, and if you can tell very quickly whether you meet it or not, that's pretty rigid. All the way to, hey, whatever goes, and I don't think that's where we're at. Again, we try to use these principles as we go through and consider when an incentive would be appropriate. So the guiding principles and whether you formally adopt these. I mean, obviously the school district has done some things, and that's kind of worked out very well for them. We're going to bump into some of that.
Can you help us with this? What's the school district done? Because I
actually defer to Dave Walter on that one.
Dave, can you help us with that? As far as the principle, what they do?
So, last time we were here, there's a document that the school district has, and they've established guidelines for their own consideration. So the guidelines, they start out with number 1, we are not in the economic development business. And then they say that, we will only participate for a set period of time. We will only participate up to a certain, it's usually 71 or 75%. And they will only participate now if the city is participating, because those are, the way they look at it is that we're more than willing to give up, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting anybody on the school district, but their feeling has been that the city is willing to give up property tax because we will make it up in sales tax. So, on the property tax basis, we don't get as much as other taxing entities do. And so we're willing to give up our portion because we think we're going to get sales tax to make up the difference.
But to clarify that, very few of the deals that we have done actually have sales tax involved. So it's not like we do have the ability to make that up.
Another items they would like to be involved sooner, up sooner in the process rather than at the tail end. So we've been working with Miss Bryant on a couple of deals, and she's actually attended several of the Duncan Aviation meetings. So that when we went to them, they had a little bit more familiar. They had someone on staff rather that had some more familiarity with the process. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question. You mentioned that they had a maximum time frame that they would participate. Do you know what that is?
It's usually 12 years. Now, on some things, they've been willing to go to 15. And then
So Duncan was 15?
Duncan is 15. But they recognize the value of Duncan to the entire community. Not, and it does provide opportunities for high school graduates in the program. Duncan has committed to being willing to work with them for not necessarily apprenticeship programs, but training programs. And then lastly, that they do have a cap on the amount of property they would subject to a redevelopment type project.
So it's the amount of property defined by value of that property?
So, as I understand it, I'm getting better clarification with Ms. Bryant tomorrow. But there is the overall assessed value of the property of the city that, but no more than 5% would be subject to a project. So that kind of, for a city such as Provo that has approximately 50 to 55% of the property within the Provo city boundaries are subject to not being taxed, right? Because of different taxing entities. So
I'm looking for some help from the council. Jason, you've got three possible, you have a few coming forward in the next little bit. And
We anticipate.
what?
We anticipate, yes.
And I think that this is a discussion that the council should have before those things come to the council. If it's all right, we are again pushing our limits here. Dave?
So I hear the school district has their criteria, and we have a list here of principles, but they're not in any particular order. Is there a way that you could put it in your order that you would kind of prefer?
Yeah, sure, you bet. So again, the interesting thing on sales tax versus property tax is property tax deals have four taxing entities where sales tax is just us. So we're not trying to strike a deal that others can then, other than the developer, we're not looking at other taxing entities to kind of see what we're doing as a comparison. But Kay had a question also, but yes, Dave, we can do that.
It's more a comment. I like the principles. I would like a little more definition to them.
Okay. We can do that.
Then when a project comes to us, I would like to see those principles, and I think you're applying them in your discussions, but I'd like them to be a little more specific to help me understand, okay, we're doing this because this principle right here, this is what we're trying to accomplish by doing this one. And this is the financial impact it's going to have. And you do most of that, but just like it a little
we can
more
absolutely.
expanded. So
not a problem.
Gives me a little more.
That's when those
understanding.
projects come in. I mean, those proposals come in, right? Is that what you're asking?
I think to get those principles prioritized or specified a little clearer, or even if there's a principle might have, like the cities or the school district says, no more than whatever. I don't think I'm looking for a real number like that, but I like maybe some of them could have a little more definition.
Okay.
So,
George?
I'm not in favor of hard, fast principles personally. I think that would be destructive to the process. We know what we've done in the past. We know what is reasonable. I think they know what's reasonable. I think the council knows and the administration knows. And we do it in closed session. We can do that in closed session, and if it's not something that's reasonable, it's not going to get out of there. And so I would hate to see us pass on a good project because it somehow doesn't meet these principles that we arbitrarily set, not knowing the conditions or situation that's going to come up in the future. We never would have done the mall had we had principles that we don't spend money front end. We wouldn't have done it. That's what had happened, in fact, in the past, why we didn't get the mall, because there was that mindset that we we're willing to go out on a limb, so.
Thank you.
Okay, and then, on the one hand, it's important to be flexible, but it'd be nice to have kind of a way to have a rating system and a priority, a checklist. And, these are the most important things, and this is how they scored on this. It doesn't mean that you fail them because of a certain item. It just gives you some basis for discussion. And you can say, well, even though they're low here, it's balanced by this other counterbalancing item. I mean, it's relative. There shouldn't be maybe a hard and fast no, but there needs to be some discussion and a way to rate.
I've heard from some council members that if we doesn't meet certain principles, then we shouldn't go ahead.
I think Dixon was the one that said this, kind of make the differentiation, and it is semantics, but one way to look at it is not to have hard and fast policies, but have guiding principles. And so, those policies might be very strict or whatever, but principles are more of the things that you're kind of, how you weigh them out. So, I appreciate what the vendor asked for, and just if it was a little bit more fleshed out. But I appreciate this discussion that we've had so far. I'm less worried about the 4 that have been identified and getting out in front of them, because it goes to some known quantities. I just hope we can have this discussion and maybe talk about some strategic things before the other ones pop up. To me, sometimes it's the ones that we haven't been looking forward to, the ones that just that pop up that are a little bit harder to maybe weigh out. I have some thoughts, but where we're at on time, I'm not even gonna throw them out. But I would. This has been a very helpful discussion for me, and I hope we've had an opportunity to discuss it a little bit.
And if it's all right with the council, we will schedule the time again, because I've got several thoughts that I've.
Yeah, and again, individually, if you have questions, you're always welcome to give us a call, have a chat, and try to answer questions for you.
I know I'm trying to end, but is there a way, like when someone comes up and they hear about a deal, they say, oh, we're giving so much away. Is there a way that we can have you've given us a little bit of a list. Is there a way that we can put a monetary value on some of that? Say, oh yeah, we're giving this up for this many years, but it's just this amount of money. Are we?
Yeah, just a summary of what the deal points are, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's what that would be, just.
For the existing ones is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Summary of deal points and a summary of, again, sort of the guiding principles that you feel make this the right choice, so that we're.
The prioritize.
Yeah, which are the principles or priorities that, I mean, I think we're all in agreement. We don't want binding rules here. I just this list is preliminary to, I think, what we're thinking here is that if you have a list of, the 5 to 7 most important reasons why you do a tax incentive, and this is in this category, this is this kind of a deal as opposed to another kind. I think that's very helpful. But this is miles ahead of where I felt I was. And I also had a helpful conversation with Scott, but I feel like just, this is very helpful for me.
Dixon, if it's okay, then you let me know as soon as how long will it take you to get that put together? Because I think I'd love to have this conversation.
Okay, well, we'll just work with Cliff on agendas and put something together and bring that back.
Thank you very much. That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
These are one of the reasons, and I think maybe Dixon still needs to be involved in this next discussion, but we invited Scott Bowles to come and talk about the world we live in today, just a little bit, and some of the things that he's experiences at the mall. I know Dixon lives in a different world today than he lived in 5 years ago, as far as trying to produce economic development here in Provo. So Scott, we appreciate you being here, and take a few minutes and tell us some things about the mall.
I'll try to zip through some of the stuff so you guys can get back on schedule. Mostly it's just answer some questions. Today I want to talk
Can I
mostly.
ask one question before? Sorry, Scott. Do we have any closed session today? I just wanted to see how we're on time. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I want to talk about retail deal making. I hear a lot from constituents of when are we going to get stuff? That's a constant thing that comes up, or the Facebook list I drone on about, I wish we had stuff A or stuff B or stuff C. So I'm going to talk about what it takes to get what you want. And there's a lot of things out there where people say, if you want to advance to the next slide, that the consumer expectation is that we write a letter, make up a phone call, we talk to some magical unicorn on the other side, and then we get stuff done. So this is a really good condensed version of what it takes. So the public is not wrong. This is actually what happens. But if you go to the next slide, this is actually it. This is a fairly good summary of how the process actually happens. 3 phases, and I want to take some time to quickly go through each phase and what each phase constitutes as actions. So if you want to go to the next slide. Oh gosh, I have one right here. The power is mine. Thank you. So phase 1 is data gathering. Now, economic development is very aware of what data gathering is. When I worked for Provo City, I would go down to Las Vegas in the month of May and go to the International Conference of Shopping Centers Retail Global Conference, or RECon. And that is all about data gathering and deal signing. So in this, there's generally 6 steps. There's transaction initiation requests, which is a little word of, what should we go after? That's what we're talking about. What transaction do we want to start? And then you establish your objectives and your project plan. If you want to go after a specific retailer, what objective do you have to want to get them, and what's the plan to try to get them successfully to your center? Yes.
From whose perspective is that? Is that from the
developer? Yes, developer, landlord, and broker.
Yeah.
But also the tenant sees it from this side as well, because they are also in this process. They evaluate current situations. So if you're a landlord and you own a mall or a strip center or even a vacant piece of land, you have to say, okay, if I own a mall, what's my occupancy? Who are my major anchors? What new things do I have here? What things do I have announced or things coming? If you have vacant land, is it shovel ready? Does it have utilities running to it? Is it on a busy intersection? How, is there anything new that's going around? What is it appraised for? Do I want to sell it? Do I want to do a land lease? And determining occupancy requirements. This is one that a lot of people don't understand. There's lots of what they call Class A retailers out there. Apple Store, Cheesecake Factory. You go through City Creek or Fashion Place, there's a lot of Class A retailers. They won't even approach you if you don't meet certain occupancy requirements. An occupancy requirement is either what is your vacancy, how many vacancies do you have, or what other major retailers do you have that we're friendly with. Right? Cheesecake Factory, if you say, oh, hey, we have a Apple Store, and we have a Keel Skincare Center, and we have a Nordstrom, and we have a Louis Vuitton, they'll go, okay, now this is good. But if you say, yeah, we have a strip center here in Denton, Texas, and we have a Piggly Wiggly and a Toys R Us, they'll be like, great, we'll take a solid pass on that, right? Because you're matchmaking. You're trying to find out the best place for the best retailers, and it has to match. And then you assess the market opportunities, right? What is the opportunity of Provo? That's something that this community talks about a lot. We have lots of opportunities, but not all opportunities are the best. We want to match the best opportunity to the best tenant. And then also, this is a key one, you identify alternatives. So for the consumer who says, we really want Cheesecake Factory. And I would say, well, Cheesecake Factory's kind of been like the thing, right, for the last 10 to 15 years. What if they're past their S-curve? What if they're actually starting to lose credibility or starting to lose market share? Who's the next Cheesecake Factory? And who's the next Cheesecake Factory after that? So if you can't get the top dog, who's the second dog that could be the next Cheesecake Factory in the long run? So you have to analyze that market. So when we look at the ask, right, there's a lot of things that we have to do before that we've talked about. The things to really look at. Do we have the correct tenancy mix? Do we have what it takes and what that retailer wants to come to the area? And also, this is a big one. Does the primary market have the income and the spending characteristics that they require? If you see a site selection form from QSRs or quick service restaurants, they'll be very specific on their site criteria. They'll say, we want so many vehicles a day. We want so many population demographics within a 1 mile or 3 mile radius. And we want household incomes via census to be at this level. If you don't have those things, we will not talk to you. And that's just the reality of it. But also, retailers kind of expect you to do their homework for them. They don't want to do the homework. A lot of retailers think they know everything already, but it's your job to convince them that they're wrong. So what is your opportunity? What if they have a competitor, and every retailer does have a competitor? They want to know, who is it? Where are they at? What's their market share? And do my competitor's competitor, are they in the area as well, and what do they do? So you have to present a very convincing picture and paint this picture before you even get to that point of saying, let's approach that retailer. There's a lot of back work that's done. So phase 2 is when you start to look at the market analysis. This is where you're preparing to get to the point where you're going to get a lease. And so once you have all this data and you identify tenant and the alternatives, then you draft what's called a letter of intent. And a letter of intent is a letter that has some very basic items on it. And it says, hey, tenant X, we are landlord Y or broker Z, and we want you to come to this proposed space at these proposed terms for this lawn until this date at this rent, and here's what we want you to do. You ship off your packet, and then you wait. Sometimes you'll get an immediate response. They'll say, oh, this looks interesting. Sure, let's talk about it. Maybe you'll get a denial. And a no is just simply an invitation to say, why don't you re-ask? Or maybe something was off. But we're not going to tell you, but why don't you come back to us with a different proposal? Or you can have your broker and the retailer's broker talk back and forth for months, even years. I know David Walter's got a good experience when he worked there with Trader Joe's in California for over 10 years, talking back and forth. It was never a solid no. It was, well, not right now, right? Not right now. Let's keep talking, not right now. That's a very common brokerage term. Not right now, the time is not right. So it's your job on the deal-making end to make the conditions right, for them to look at that LOI and finally go into phase 3, where the prospective tenant says, I'm going to sign this LOI. I agree with these initial terms. Let's go to legal. Let's sit down at the same table and let's talk about lease negotiations. Now, for me, this is the part that gives me a heart attack, because this is where you're so close to the finish line. But at any time, any side could just say, no, this isn't working for me. No, this isn't working. The key of this phase is both sides, the landlord and the tenant, have to come to amenable terms. Both sides need to feel like neither's getting too much of a chunk of flesh taken out of them, and that both sides feel that there's going to be an equitable exchange of capital, both either in terms of tenant improvements versus revenue generated, or rent received versus tenant allowance had to be paid out.
How do you get to those positions where regional or national economic conditions change, and that just completely changes the day?
It does, yeah. So market conditions can change. You can have something in legal. Legal doesn't mean that you're bound to a lease, because you're not bound to a lease until signatures are there. Market condition could happen. Housing market could crash tomorrow. You could have a dozen deals in legal, and they could all walk away. Right? So this is simply a time where all these conditions have been built. They feel there's an opportunity, but now we want to agree on a lease. So yes, national conditions change this constantly. And this process takes anywhere from a few months to well over a year. Right now, we have a number of deals in legal where we've been going back and forth, back and forth. Some of them have exited out of legal. So let's go back to the LOI. And we finagle the LOI. Well, let's go back to legal. Now we're more comfortable. Let's go back to the table. And what they do is they're creating a red line lease. A red line lease is a big lease document. And the attorneys will go through and say, I'm going to strike this out. I'm going to write something indifferent. I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm going to have your attorneys look at it and see what you think. And that process goes back and forth until the red stops. And then people can say, okay, are we okay with this? And once they're fine with it, they say, okay, now we can finalize this lease. It's executed by signature, and then space is delivered, a build out has to happen, and then after that, we get the happy moments where people cut ribbons and fun announcements are made. So it's very, very, very time consuming. And I know that a lot of people don't think that enough has happened. And in this world, and Provo is actually really new to the world of retail. Right? A lot of people say, well, Orem's getting all this stuff, or Spanish Fork is getting all this stuff, or all these other places are. But they've made a very conscientious decision to say, this is something we really want to base a large part of our economy about. We have built a mall. We do have the Riverwoods. But in their own essence, the mall was owned by a large real estate trust, General Growth Properties, for the longest time. They didn't integrate with the community too much, right? So now you have someone who's very involved in the community, wants to do things differently, and it will take time. It will take time. It's a very new process for all of us. But before I go anymore, I know I rushed through those 3 phases. Before I get to a summary, does anyone have any questions about anything that I've said so far?
How are we as a city, as a community in attracting things? How hard do you find it? Have you had experience in other places? Where are we in Provo, I guess?
I think you have to start figuring, where are we as a state, right? So, and it's, if none of you have been to the ICSC Global Conference in Las Vegas, that's where you can really go to understand retail. And there's a statistic that floats out there, whether it's true or not, that says it's usually like about 8 out of every 10 retail deals that are cut globally are cut in Vegas in this 3-day conference. And you'll see why, because there's tens of thousands of people that gather together to gather data and start the process of moving LOIs to legal. That's why they're there. They're there to cut deals, not just to shake hands and hit a show. They're there to make deals. That's why they call it a deal-making conference. The state of Utah, and they do a whole booth there where they can come in and learn more about the state. Not even 5 years ago, there were major retailers that are going, yeah, so you guys still do the polygamy thing, and how's that going out for you guys? No, we really don't. And it doesn't help that we have alcohol laws that are different from the rest of the country. There's lots of perceptions that are out there from people. And a lot of retailers look at the Salt Lake area and they say, well, Salt Lake, that's kind of a metropolitan area, but everything is pretty rural for us outside of that. They don't see us as a major competing market like Miami or Atlanta or LA or Dallas. Those are major markets where they know, well, there's money there, there's big capital. When you drill down to Provo, they go, well, yeah, Provo's really got some good things going for it. We've seen it in some articles, but they're cheap. I've heard that numerous times. Yeah, Provo's cheap. It's cheap because they look at, if you go back to phase 1, incomes matter, right? What's the household income? What's the spending data? If we go to our partners and other retailers, what are they making in their stores there versus what are they making in their stores in other major metropolitan areas? And if you're down from that to them, well, you're cheap. Convince me otherwise.
Are we usually down?
Yeah. Utah in general is generally down. And I always say, like, Utahns aren't cheap. Utahns have a different value perception, right? And doing market tours, we'll go and say, you point out how many luxury cars you see. And they'll look, oh yeah, there's quite a few. Like, well, the value's there. I said, but is there value in Victoria's Secret in Provo, Utah versus the values of Victoria's Secret in Atlanta? I said, there's some cultural things that we have to do here. It's not that it's not allowed, there are different things that you need to understand. It's educating the tenant. Because most tenants, they have their national standard of what they want to make. If they can't make that, it's your job to convince them otherwise. Or what Dixon commonly talks about is that gap, right? They have to overcome that gap. They want to make the same amount of money, if not more. every single one of their stores. There's going to be an exception. They want to know why. They want to know how they can overcome it, or even if they can overcome it. If they can't, why is their presence there worth their time? Right? Lots of questions that have to be answered. And the touchy-feelies doesn't really matter. One thing that...
What's a touchy-feely?
A touchy-feely? Well, we got great quality of life. Look at our mountains. You know, we got good bicycle infrastructure too. They'll go, great. Doesn't deal in dollars and cents to us, right?
Not in retail, but it does.
Not in retail.
But it does in attracting manufacturers or
so
IT folks.
Yeah, but here's the thing. But those things, those touchy-feely things to retailers do get families to live here. You have more families, you have more housetops. You have more housetops, you have more ability to grow your income base, grow that pie, which can inevitably get you to what retailers want, right? So
Don't they want to be here for a long time? I mean, they don't want to be
Yes.
moving every.
No, and then in a standard lease build out, you look at a 10-year term at least. Because if they're taking over a space in a vacant building, or they're building something ground up, they're gonna be spending a lot of money. They don't want to just say, oh, 3 years out, I'm gonna leave. They're gonna lose too much money. They don't want to do that. So they want a long-term commitment. And for them, it's business.
Did Nordstrom's leaving the market affect that view of being cheap?
No, you know, George, I think there was so many things associated with that deal. I don't think it was too cheap. I think a lot of the national retailers have said, well, that was expected. I think it would have been a good thing if Nordstrom would have stayed down here, but I think Nordstrom building their presence at City Creek really created this momentum for the corporate side to say, maybe we should just consolidate into a new Class A center and really build a really grandiose store, which they did. So
the national chain's knowledgeable about the conditions, the incentives that they were given to come, and that's why they didn't say.
Very much so, yeah. And it's, in general, from corporate all the way down to the regional managers and district managers, they're all very knowledgeable. They all communicate. The line of communication is very clear. So usually you have to try to skip up past regionals and districts and go straight to the head and try to educate from there so they can disseminate information down. But it takes time. All of this takes time, which is sometimes not your friend when you're trying to get things done. So in summary, the first thing I want to say is retail is a difficult market right now. But I went to a conference earlier this year, and there's this statistician of retail who was talking about the very volatile nature of retail. And his whole summary was, he said, retailers die, retail will not. And that was the whole point of his whole conversation. He talked about an hour about how retailers have adopted and expanded, or they've refused to adopt and have died. He said retail's not going away, but retail is really going through a drastic change right now. Technology, oh, yes.
So it's one of those changes to work with the internet and have an online presence and not just be a old-fashioned retail store.
I think it's going to be that customer service in and of itself, right? It's not going to be an app because people still like this, especially when you're shopping. You want to talk to someone, and for certain things, but other things, toilet paper, I don't need to talk to somebody at toilet. But if I'm doing something a little bit more personal, that's fine. But how can this equate into better customer service? Not replace it. I think the retailers that really grasp that concept are going to be the ones that go into the next 20 to 30 years and really grow their market share. I think the ones that refuse to do that, I think they'll probably see reduced sales, closed stores, and bankruptcy. Ones that refuse to change how their market works. Yeah, so retailers, I think we'll still continue to see retailers die. I think that will happen. But I think you'll see a lot of retailers that will grow. I think you'll see a lot more smaller base retails and boutiques that will pop up, and larger retail chains that use technology to deliver a better element of customer service and a different type of experience, because people like to spend money on experience and food. which is tied to experience. So I think retail's next thing for the next 5 to 10 years is how can it be an experience? Because that's what people want. They want to be entertained. So in summary for all of you, so phase one, just remember it's all about the facts. So some questions to always consider when looking at that. So why is your community, your shopping center, and or your location or piece of land the best for a specific retailer? Not just good, not just okay, but the best. Why is it the best? Are your numbers or that ask that you're going to put together, is it good enough to convince a retailer that you're telling the truth and that they can make their anticipated profit margins? If it's not, they're not going to come. And then is there something in your community or shopping center that would prohibit this tenant from choosing you? If so, is it curable or incurable? Now there's a few examples of tenants who have very specific site selection criteria. There are some restaurants that won't locate in Utah yet because of what they call a Zion curtain, even with modifications to it. They say, we're not going to go to architecture and build a whole new store format just to go to Utah. We'll wait. That's a reality. There's people who want to come, but if they feel that it's an incurable issue, they'll just say, well, we'll just sit back and we'll wait for a little bit. Phase two, it's all about the ask. Once we have our facts, we go to our ask. Is your lease competitive with the surrounding area? So if you're a shopping mall, if you go to all your other shopping centers that they could come to, are you competitive in your terms and in the lease that you want to get? And can the landlord or the prospective tenant find common ground? They can't, they'll never come to the table. And does the intent of the landlord and property meet the needs and the vision of the proposed tenant? Like it was said, yes, that tenant wants to be there for a long time. So when they're making a large investment, do they feel that that center where they're going to put their operations in, is it going to extend well into the terms of their lease? Or is there going to be proper investment? Is the area up and coming? Are there projects announced? That's what they want to see. And phase three, it's all about the task. So once we gather our data and we get an LOI out, and now that we're in legal, can both the landlord and the prospective tenant agree on mutually amenable terms, right? With that contract, can they go back and forth and not feel like either side is getting taken advantage of? Do the timelines of both the landlord and the prospective tenant align? So if you have a landlord that says, hey, I really need a deal in the next 90 days, and the tenant says, I'm in no rush, I could wait a year, landlord might just move on. Or they might extend their time and say, well, okay, yeah, we can wait. And then lastly, if incentives are requested, I know it's something we just talked about, can the landlord or the community provide what is needed? And usually that incentives usually come up end of phase two, beginning of phase three, because that's usually during those back and forths, that's when the gap is presented. And they'll say, well, how are we going to fill this gap? So that's my presentation today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything you might have.
How important is it, so when you're putting together a mall space, are you looking for one-ofs, or are you looking for to create a place of attraction where a customer can go in and shop 3 types of shoe stores or something like that?
Yes.
You like
sure. So it's in retail terms, there's a thing called your tenancy mix, right? Are you heavy on shoe stores? Do you have a lot of apparel? Do you have not enough apparel? How much food do you have? It really boils it down to, in your terms of total square footage, what uses are in total amounts of square feet. So like for Provo Town Center, a lot of people go through and go, wow, for a place that has lots of families and kids, you really have no kid uses. Where's your Gymboree? Where's your Oshkosh? Where are the kids' clothing? Like it's missing. It's true. It is missing. So it's finding tenants that meet the market, because you can't just ask a tenant to come where there is no market, right? Because then you're creating an artificial market for them, which, to Jordan's point with Nordstrom, perhaps an artificial market was created through an incentive. And if the market doesn't build or get created or even exist by the time the incentive's gone, the likely scenario is they'll just wash their hands of it and say, well, that investment, we're moving on.
thing that I want to know is what, how, and when. I mean, especially who and when, I guess.
Sure.
But the question is, you're in the mix as you go back. I can see you going back and forth and back and forth. Timing on announcements, Scott. How are those done, or when?
Sure. I will tell you, we have a number of deals in this phase right here, in phase 3. They're in legal, and they're going back and forth. And that's an email once a week I send at the very beginning of the week and go, do we have an announcement date? And usually legal will come back, not yet, not yet, not yet. It's frustrating. That's why I said, for me, this is the one that gives me the most anxiety and the most stress, because there is no time. You could get a call one day and says, yep, they finally agreed to everything. We're getting ready to execute in the next week or the next 30 days. There's no set timeline. I wish there was, but it's, and in real estate law, and it was in all of us who have bought a house, that same thing that says time is of the essence, it's in retail leases too. Both sides don't want to waste time, but both sides want to make sure that they're getting the best deal possible. And usually the attorneys will argue about that, about what is the best term. So that goes back and forth. And if there's a major market change, or like I know when Jim Barry announced a bunch of closures, a lot of people took 2 steps back and said, well, let's see where this goes. Let's see if this has a chain reaction. Just depends. And I wish I could give you some firm answers. I'm optimistic. I will say this, I'm optimistic that very soon you'll be hearing some things from us.
Thank you.
And a question I do have for you is, let me know what questions you may have. I mean, this is a very high level overview. You see something in here and you say, man, I really want to know more about this. Please let me know. I'm more than happy to give you all the information you need so you start to understand this process. It's complex and it changes constantly, and it differs from tenant to tenant. Yeah.
So we see the interest rates are bumping up, and they have plans to raise them a couple times this year, maybe a couple times next year. Interest rates going up, how does that affect your environment?
Depends if a tenant is really cash heavy or if they need to lend. If they need to lend, oh man, that could spell some trouble. What I'm more concerned about is labor availability and cost of raw materials. That has really caused a lot of tenant improvement schedules to go up substantially. Especially here in Utah, the availability of labor, it's really expensive. And I know that the Marriott Hotel outside of our store, they said, well, we wanted, I think they said 2 dozen framers. They can only hire 13. And still they met their deadline, which is pretty amazing. So that always is an interesting mix. No specific answer, but it just depends on the type of deal that comes. But yeah, interest rates are good for some stuff. Like if you're saving or putting money away, wonderful. But if you need to borrow, you got to look at your pro forma, your bottom line goes up. So where are you going to take money off to make the deal match again? Or it's going to create a gap at the end.
Thank you, Scott. This is something that the council needs to be aware of. And on top of Scott's been really good at call him, go down to his office. He's glad to talk with you, and he can give you a few more details on some of the things that are actually happening in our mall. He's giving you an overview of where we are in the perspective of Provo City, but he can give you some specifics according to what he's dealing with also, if you're interested. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll go on to item number 9, a discussion on the ordinance text amendment to section 14.14A.070 to increase the height limit of assisted living facilities in low density residential LDR zone from 30 feet to 40 feet. And Dustin Wright will present that. Dustin, we have about 10 minutes for you. That's what we had allotted, so. All right, thanks.
All right, so the low density residential zone, or the LDR zone, is what the applicant is looking to amend here. Currently, the zone allows for building heights of 30 feet, and the applicant is requesting that for assisted living facilities, that height limit increase 10 feet up to, so it's 40 feet. So here's a map of the city. The properties outlined in green here show the existing LDR zones throughout the city. At the top of the map there is the largest one at the top there is where the applicant has recently developed the Legacy Village assisted living facility up there on 4200 North at University Avenue. So that was phase one. They're looking to do phase two on that site, and as part of that, they're looking to get that additional 10 feet so they can do 3-story development instead of 2, like the existing facility there. The other sites around the city, when they came in for their zone changes to become LDR zones, they've got their projects, some of them are already built, some are in the progress of being built. So we don't see this ordinance amendment affecting those existing LDR sites throughout the city.
Question. There's a 200-foot setback in the wording?
Correct.
And how does that affect some of the smaller LDRs? Would it preclude anything?
Yeah, so it pretty much would, a lot of those really small ones, they wouldn't be able to, if they wanted to come in and tear down what was there and put in an assisted living facility, they probably wouldn't be able to at that height. They could still do something at the 30 feet. But that caveat in there, the 200-foot buffer, really limits what sites could actually see this in the city.
So is it basically limited to that one site?
Pretty much, unless, at some point in the future, if a new property within the city came in and wanted to rezone to LDR that could meet those requirements, then.
But there's nothing in those other ones that you're aware of right now that would just.
Yeah, well, pretty much all those are they're either built or under construction. So for them to actually change their mind and tear down and go to build that, it doesn't seem very likely. So.
One of the public comments was concern about this being 4 stories and not 3 in some way. Is that?
Yeah, so at 40 feet, that would be a 3-story structure. That's what they're looking to do. One of the interesting things is in the LD, or just in a residential zone, like an R110 zone, the building height is 35 feet, so 5 feet higher than it is in the LDR zone. But yeah, so that threshold wouldn't really work for a 4-story. And it would still be 40 feet, even if they did try to cram a story in there somehow. So this map here shows the property here where they did phase 1 of the assisted living facility. And down here below it, they would like to put phase 2 in there. On the east and west of the property, there's some single-family residential homes that would be well outside of that 200-foot buffer. To the south of it, as part of phase 1, they built some triplexes and duplexes down here that would be closer to that. So that's why there's that caveat in there to be for the detached single-family homes. I'm pointing this to the right. There we go. Here's a street view looking east. This shows the existing facility here, and then this was where phase 2 would go, where they'd like to do the 3 stories there. Residents up on the bluff there sit substantially higher, I'd say about 70 feet or so above the grade down below. And as you can see, there's substantial vegetation within that quick slope elevation there. And so, kind of like I mentioned earlier, the LDR zone is 5 feet shorter than what an R110 zone, for example, would be. The setback, if you had a R110 home and an adjacent home, there'd be a 20-foot setback requirement between those. They're requesting a 200-foot setback, so it's 10 times as much for that added 5 feet. So that buffer really does help mitigate that height increase. This item was heard at the Planning Commission last week, and they recommended approval. I recommend the council give approval on this item. And I'll be happy answering any other questions you have.
George, go ahead.
How tall are the current buildings? You might have answered that, but I missed it.
These ones fit into the current zone, which is 30-foot.
Not 35?
The LDR zone has a 30-foot maximum. I mentioned that the single-family residential zone has a 35-foot.
But the current buildings are only 30 feet tall. Why do they want 40 feet?
They're looking to do a 3rd story on this next phase instead of just 2 stories.
I don't see anything in here as far as density, increase in density yet. Are they coming back with the proposal for that? All we're talking about height is on this one. Is that correct right now?
Yeah, they're not, they haven't talked to us necessarily about anything else on the phase 2. They're just coming into and then the ordinance. They haven't submitted a project plan or anything for phase 2 yet.
And so the neighborhood, I guess we can talk about this tonight, is coming in tonight, but the neighborhood discussion had to do with height rather than density at this point.
Yeah. And this just affects the height going from 30 to 40 feet. It doesn't change the density.
Aren't there triplexes right across the road to the right? Or am I in the wrong location?
Yeah.
It's
Yes, down here.
Primarily duplexes.
Duplex, triplex that were part of Perry Homes Phase 1. They did the assisted living facility and they're building those, so.
Just lost it. What is the density requirement or restrictions for LDR? Do assisted living centers have different density requirements than regular townhomes?
So as far as assisted living goes, there isn't a density requirement for this project. There was a development agreement where they capped out a number of beds for the assisted living. I think it was at 187.
But LDR allows unlimited density of beds in an assisted living.
Yeah, so assisted living facilities can go in any residential zone and there's not a density requirement for those. They'd have to meet parking requirements and things like that.
Or
From my recollection, that there's some kind of an equivalence of the number of units you can have for a normal residence to the number that you can have in assisted living. It was a pretty, unless that's changed, it was a pretty big multiple. So like in the LDR zone, you can have 15 units, but then assisted living center, 15 units per acre, but assisted living center, each unit can have something like 7 per unit or something. I remember the number that you could have was so high that it figured it couldn't actually physically be built within the constraints of the LDR zone. And then to limit that, we ended up doing a development agreement with some kind of a cap on it. That's what I remember.
I had a hard time understanding one of the neighborhood concerns for the public and a need to improve Lover's Lane to help mitigate higher structure the adjacent neighborhood. What does that mean?
So I believe that comment came from someone that lives up above on that bluff, and Lover's Lane runs alongside this LDR zone. So their request was that to help mitigate the impact that they feel they have of looking down on this facility, that there should be some type of increased landscaping within that area. But
so that statement is You'll improve my park, I'll shut my eyes to anything else I don't like, is that what it is? More or less?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, you can
I
Make it so
didn't know-
beautiful that you never look up to even notice.
I couldn't see the correlation there, that's why I was concerned about that.
Lover's Lane is an old open wound for some people.
And I get that, I know all about Lover's Lane, but I was trying to get.
What do you do?
Wait a minute.
Tell us your story.
But I do get this, I just was trying to figure out the correlation, and I could not figure out in my mind where the correlation was at this point, and I needed looking for a little help.
Yeah, as part of phase one of the assisted living facility, Prairie Homes did work with the Parks Department on improving the trail along Lover's Lane that was at that time in a lot worse condition. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just that helps me. Okay, and then we'll close. This is coming back to us again tonight.
So, just looking over this, and I appreciate the work that's been put into it. I realize often we're problem solvers. Someone wants to do something, we try to figure out, okay, how do we make this fit? And I appreciate that. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this a little bit. Is there any concern that we have LDR specifications? We came up with them kind of, not looking at a project. We said, what should LDR look like? And we said, okay, 30-foot cap. And now we're saying, well, to accommodate something, maybe we should go up to 40. I guess my question is do we feel that 40 feet, even if it's for an assisted living center, do we feel that it's still within the nature of LDR and what we were trying to accomplish with LDR? Is assisted living such a different beast that 40 feet of assisted living doesn't equate, or equates to 30 feet of other uses? Or perhaps maybe they should be coming in and asking for MDR for that property. That's what I'm struggling with. It feels like perhaps we're changing the nature of what this zone allows. That's my first one. The other is I do find it a little strange, this 200-foot setback from any single-family detached. We looked in and we said, okay, look, there's a whole bunch of little green ones all around there, but they're so small that 20 feet of buffer. There's nothing much left. But that really depends on how close a single-family detached structure is from those boundaries. You might have an LDR that is either in an area with a higher density around it, or maybe there's just no single-family detached around. And now you could put something in there. And does it matter that maybe later on someone puts a single family detached close and now it's no longer conforming? And so it seems an odd way to approach it. Usually buffers go from the edge of the property lines or the zone, and not from a structure that could be somewhere on the other side of that property line. And we're doing it for single-family detached. Some of those twin homes function pretty similarly to a single-family detached. And why single-family detached, and not the townhomes, twin homes, I should say. And then lastly, I think it was in there. There's still chatter about some of these group homes, some of these assisted living homes converting later on to drug treatment homes, which is a service I think we need to have in our community, but there seems to be some discomfort on do we know what we're going to get in the future? Are we opening the doors to things that we haven't thought all the way through, and what are the ramifications? And I think we talked about it last month, but I never got fully resolved on. And it seemed like it was an SLU land code seemed to be odd. Like there was a duplicate, and there's these drug treatment inside a category that really is dissimilar to that. And to me, it seems like a typo rather than an intentional thing. So those are I guess, the three things that I'm unsettled on so far on this proposal.
Then we're gonna have to close. Go ahead, real quick.
I think I have very similar concerns about it. First, I want to say though that I love the facility. I think it's a great asset to the community, and my initial thinking about this was it'd be great to help them be able to do this expansion, but as I understand it, the reason they're asking for it is because demand for assisted living facilities has been softer than they expected. Rents are lower, and so they want to increase density to compensate for that. And I think it's a great benefit to the community, but in my mind, I'm thinking, well, we have other types of housing. What if it was housing for young married couples and there was a high demand, and so we wanted to raise the height limit for that type of housing? Or if it was housing for young single professionals, and again, the demand was really high, and so that justifies raising the height for that type of use. And so I like the way you put it. It seems like this is just crafted to just sort of make this one little exception in this one place, and I'm just having a hard time generalizing this to sort of make sense out of it if it were applied in other areas. I just coincidentally walked through that area yesterday for the first time in a long time, and those twin homes are beautiful, those duplexes. In fact, for a minute, I forgot that they were duplexes. I was thinking this is very similar to a detached single-family home neighborhood, except that structures are bigger, of course. And so I'm trying to understand why we would say, well, the detached single-family homes have to be 200 feet away, but it's okay for these homes to be right there. So anyway,
I think those are some of the discussions that we can have and talk about tonight. And Justin, if you can kind of hear those questions here, and if it's possible, come back with a few answers to a few of those things. Short notice here, I get it. But appreciate your input here. And Birch?
I share the same concerns, trying to make, so they can be profitable, we're gonna change our ordinance. I never have liked that.
Okay, thank you. We will, we have an implied motion to adjourn. And remind you that the council meeting will start at 5:30. We have lunch in there.
This one. Yeah, this is the only one that looked to me like it might be. Yes.